and this is a study session, which I call to order.
Yes.
I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda as published.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved. I vote 5-0. And I will pass it on to Dr. Arnold.
Great. Thank you and good morning, everyone. I think I was reflecting a little bit about study sessions, and I think if I think back to the board meetings I've been attending for a little over a decade now, there were really two major study sessions during the year. The one that would happen right about now, and then one in June. And I know we've added some study sessions. And I think that has helped because trying to cram in a lot of information into your regular meetings is really challenging. But this is one of the two that have always been scheduled. You'll see obviously by the agenda that the bulk of it is really about finally coming to that place of our long range facility plan. Culmination of all the work, bringing it together, and then looking for the next steps in direction. So the purpose today is hopefully that we leave here feeling positive about our process, and then ready to take this to a larger, probably community audience on the 25th. Where it doesn't require formal action, but where we'll kind of codify whether or not this is the direction we want to move in. We're going to present the long range facility plan that's in the paper copy in a high level preview that are in the slides that are in the agenda today. And then, this is not meant to be a one-way presentation. We're going to go slowly through it, asking questions. Because what we'd like to do then is take any of your feedback and make sure we tweak it, improve it, and have it really ready to go for the 25th. Then we'll talk a little bit about restructuring and refinancing bonds that are currently on the books right now to save our taxpayers some money. And then wrap up today with starting to look forward to open enrollment and what are we thinking there. So hopefully it'll be a productive morning and a lot of good learning for all of us. Before we get going, why don't we go ahead and do introductions? We do have two guests with us today. So why don't we start with our president, Director Lurie, and then we'll go around this way and then we'll end with our guest online.
Hi, I'm Deborah Lurie, board member.
Dan Glowitz, board member, third year on the board, and I guess germane to discussions of renovation, capital improvement. I was at the high school when it was being renovated back in the late 90s.
Jody Lee, board member. Maggie Tentecker, board member.
Christina Martinez, board member.
Ryan Swanson with Piper Sandler. Matt Sullivan, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Tony Kuhn, Maintenance and Operations.
Randy Fox, capital projects.
Andrew Stronser, technology director.
Brett Rundle, superintendent, and Josh.
Hi, my name is Josh Borzik. I work with an ed service agency out of Wisconsin, and I helped distribute the bond survey as well as help to develop the dashboard for it.
So Josh works for an organization that the ESDs are to Washington as his organization is to Wisconsin. Best way to kind of describe it. Former principal, I think you had said along the way, Josh, and is kind of a contractor through Qualtrics, which is the company we use for the surveys. So with that, we're going to dive right into our long range facility plan update. So I will share my screen and we will get rolling. So the opening is really a reminder of our general purpose of our long-range facility plans. This slide is mainly more for the community and others than you who have sat through many of our plans and updates, but just as a reminder on that is really it's the strategic plan of how we're going to manage our assets. And in this case, it's our facilities. And as you'll see in the slides, and as we always remind people, it's not just the schools, although they are the most important facilities we own. It's this building, Mary Way Pool, all of the infrastructure that we have or land, including South Mercer Playfield. And so obviously it's much bigger than the schools, but that is what is most important and obviously is what we highlight here. As part of this process, reminding us that it actually goes back to 2019, 2020, when the first group came together as part of this process, and then COVID interrupted that. So we reconvened last year, and we've been really hard at it. Director Glowitz and Director Lurie have been on that team, working with Malum Architects, as well as some others who have provided inputs along the way. And I think it's an exciting day to finally get to this point when you see all of the efforts that included community input, that engaged our staff and others to say, you know, here's where we think the facility should go. My hope is that we don't enter a period going forward where we're going to have this lag, or we're not updating. I'm hoping that we really think about this yearly on the update, and then really make some of these major improvements, rather than waiting until we're ready for a bond or we're ready for projects. I think it should just be part of our regular conversations so that we can continue to keep our schools in the very best condition possible. So thinking about always going back to what is the vision, what's the mission, what the goals of the school district, we've really tried to always go back and align this process with those, thinking about our values around, you know, how do our facilities meet the needs of the whole child? How do our facilities make sure we have rigorous and academic learning opportunities for our students? And you know, that was kind of a filter or a sieve all the way through the long range facility committee process. And I know has been important to you as a board. And then we have our commitments, and these really come out of the OEs, and the expectations of me and the expectations you have of things of making sure that it's healthy, that it's supportive, that we have schools that when people come from other school districts, that they see them and we have points of pride. It doesn't mean we always have to have the newest and the shiniest, but we have functional and it's safe and has some excellent opportunities for athletics and performances and others. So ultimately, we'll always go back to making sure that our decisions align with what you as a board that have set forward, and then what we've agreed to as a community are our values. So when we were thinking about this, Brandy did a lot of great work, especially with Malum, really thinking about going back to 2019, 2020, what were the values of the committee? And since she's really been the bridge between these, I've transitioned, Matt's come in, there's been others, but Brandy, you've been the one who's kind of been here, not for just this one, but others. So you're best to speak to this.
Since we tortured Dan in the 90s at the high school. So, you know, we really wanted this long-range facilities plan update to tell the story of, you know, 2023 and before and how we got to this. So when we convened this committee, we brought to them the goals from the 2019 group. And Malum, you know, really wanted to affirm that these were still valid goals for the plan, which they were. You know, they include flexible spaces, more opportunities for occupational learning, you know, support spaces for teachers, improvements to athletic fields. But there were two new things that the 23 committee felt were really important that we add, and that is to include improvements to support the fine arts and performing arts at the high school, And then also to really focus clearly on college and career readiness programs at the high school. So those two goals were added. We'll do that. The long-range facilities plan document includes the need at the elementary schools as well as the middle and high school, but I thought for today, in the study session, we really focus on the middle school and high school, since our recommendation to you is to not do anything with the elementary schools for a few years. So, you know, the continuing challenges at the middle school are really this lack of connection between the old building and the new, and they were never meant to be standalone. The original building was always meant to be finished. And that's created, issues for kids. We heard in the committee meetings, it's created issues for staffing, and it certainly is a security concern, for the school. The older buildings lack in a lot of ways that the new buildings don't. This building doesn't. So I won't get into too much detail there, but the recommendation is to finish the middle school. There's also a lot of programming at the high school. You know, the last significant work we did was 1996, 97. I think we finished that. So that means that,
Your heyday, Dr. Bloom.
Yeah.
Did some additions, right?
It means that there are a lot of spaces there that have gone 26, 27 years without a renovation, and that includes biology and chemistry and general purpose classrooms. And through the CapTech levy, we've been able to successfully, accomplish a few things. We were able to remodel the library and have a culinary classroom, but we can't do any really significant renovation or extensive renovation work. I think if this process moves forward, this is going to be, a big focus at the high school is really validating with a larger group of people that these are all valid. And I'm sure there are some things that are missing from this list that the high school staff would suggest we add, and then trying to prioritize that need. The next part of the report that we want to talk about is capacity and utilization, and we had a lot of conversation about this around the elementary schools, but it's actually applicable at all levels. So this chart, you've seen in a lot of presentations, and it's included in the report. This chart identifies the permanent capacity, so that's the built capacity on site, as well as the portable capacity, which is shown there in gray. And I wanted to take a little bit of time and explain how we determined that capacity. So the determined capacity at the elementary level is a little bit different than the middle school and high school, in that an elementary school classroom is used all day by one period. So you can see in the chart that what was used in the original study was a capacity times a target number of students. So for Island Park, that's 19 times 24. And the 19 is important because depends on which rooms you count, right, that creates the capacity. So for the purposes of the initial study, we counted all classrooms except for the music classroom and one special ed classroom. So that really gives you your kind of maximum capacity in an elementary school. And then we wanted to compare at the elementary level, the number of classrooms being used versus the number of classrooms available. So you can see for Island Park, they're using 16 classrooms for their intended purposes. Doesn't mean they aren't using all of them, because they are using all of them, but they might have 2 classrooms assigned for special ed. They might have a dedicated art room. They might have turned 1 classroom into offices for staff. And so you can see that utilization of each of the elementary schools. At the middle and high school level, we look at it a little bit differently because that's periods per day. So at the middle school, we take the number of available classrooms, actually classrooms and teaching spaces, and multiply that by 6 periods a day.
Question on utilization. So for many of the sort of more modern contemporary elementary designs, there's the notion of flexible class spaces. So could one way of viewing older buildings, which, underutilization, that those classrooms are essentially functionally the exact same as flexible workspace? And so by sort of categorizing it differently, might you get an older elementary building that functionally is similar to a modern building, but the modern would say 100% utilization, and then the older one would say, something less than 100%.
That's a great point, and I actually have some info for you on that. It's something that the board get asked about. This is like the maximum utilization model. What about a more comfortable utilization model? So we'll look at that here in a minute. The one thing I would say, the one thing.
I bet we can do the same thing.
The one thing I would say is that just having an extra classroom is not the same as having purpose-built, learning space or teacher office space. So it's not just having the square footage, but it's how it's designed and able to be used, that makes them more effective.
And that whole piece of shared, or, it's being able for the teaching staff to be able to see out into that space. So when you're at Northwood, you look at that shared learning, the teacher can be in the classroom in front of, the majority of their students. But then they have that shared space outside, where if we look at a spare classroom, you wouldn't necessarily have that without having additional staff in that space. So to have that shared space.
Right, and really, you wouldn't use an extra classroom in the same way. I mean, you might use it for breakout, but,
Right.
but it's not quite the same.
But they do, with my principal hat on, I think all of that is true, right? I think all these statements are true. Schools are like water. When you're a principal, if you have space, you're gonna find a way to use it. And you'll be creative about it, even if it's not ideal. You're gonna do, and that can be kind of hard, because if we get used to large footprints and we don't have a lot of staff, then when we go to build a school that might be for that capacity, people might feel like, oh, we don't have as much room, but it's just because we spilled out everywhere versus, so there's always a tension there a little bit, but yes, all of our classrooms, as you're gonna see in the next slide, are being used. They're just being used in different creative ways that aren't part of capacity, because as Brandy said, ultimate capacity is how many students can we have in the school providing general education classroom.
Yeah, that's a great point. At the middle and high school, it's a little bit different, right? Because in both of those settings, teachers can teach in multiple classrooms. So unlike an elementary school where a class is assigned all day to a specific classroom, and a teacher has a classroom. So we look at it in periods per day. And what you see is a 65% utilization of the current Islander Middle School facility and 71% at the high school. 65, that just reflects the excess space that was left. There are a lot more classrooms than they actually need to function at the middle school right now. And it's part of why we've talked about rebuilding it at a slightly smaller square footage to get that utilization brought up.
And it's more typical that you see middle schools where the teacher's classroom is also their office, so they're there all day long. In high schools, it is kind of split. You'll see, depending on districts, of whether or not they have an office and then they go to the classroom, much like a university or whatnot, rather than their classroom being their office. We've always had at least in my time, the middle schools always had the model where the teacher's classroom is their office, and the high schools typically almost exclusively had offices. So that also changes that. So if you're looking at other districts, that's a nuance that you have to take into account. So this is our model of what we've done over time.
You might be curious why both the middle school and the high school end up at 83%. And I think if I showed you the data, they're slightly, like one's 82.9, I think, or something, but we count all of the classrooms at their target capacity. We count gymnasium teaching spaces at their target capacity, but there are a few areas in the building that we count with lower capacity, and that might be, for example, a special ed classroom Instead of having 6 periods available in a day, we count that as 5. So if you really want to dive into the details on this, there's an issue paper that we provided to the committee that goes on for pages and pages and pages of detail about how those calculations are done.
Right, can I ask sorry, I haven't been in as deep as the rest of the board. Does this sort of count when you're talking about capacity, does that sort of reflect the idea that like, oh, we have an empty classroom, we can use it as sort of a dedicated set aside spot for this activity or this function of our classrooms? But if we were at full capacity, then that space wouldn't exist? Or,
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. This is saying if we used all of the classrooms for their originally intended purpose, what is the maximum number of students that we can fit into this building?
so being under capacity isn't could be a positive thing.
Could be positive, which is a great intro to the next slide.
Can I ask
You're
a
welcome.
quick question really quick? So the Crest Center is counted under the high school?
If Crest is included in the high school.
Okay, thanks.
Not good.
It's not there. So when we were having discussions with the board about this previously, this kind of exact question around the elementary schools came up, which is, let's look at its maximum capacity, and then let's look at an alternate planning capacity that is a little bit more comfortable. So in this metric, we have assigned a permanent art classroom and taken that out of the count, and we have assigned 2 classrooms to special ed. So across the board, it reduced each one of those by 2 classrooms. Northwood is the anomaly in there because it has a purpose-built art room, which we never counted to start with. But you can see that, West Mercer, if you count it that way, is utilized at 100%. The others are slightly lower, but it is a more comfortable approach. And again, remember, in addition to this, there are the modular portable buildings that are being used.
Sorry, I missed that. They're being used for.
Innovation learning,
Right.
storage and other things. So there's actually more space than you're seeing.
And in the case of this weekend, it was nice to have a little extra capacity when one of our classrooms was damaged because of a broken fire sprinkler or whatnot. I do want to point out that Tony, the principal, the teacher, our custodians, our facilities team, we didn't have to close the school. You might have seen a lot of districts have had to close schools this week, not just because of the weather, but because of that. They were here on Monday, Sunday night, working on it, and we were able to shuffle around with another classroom. Learning continued on Tuesday. So sometimes, that flexible space is very nice, but thank you, Tony, to you and your team.
This is your slide, Brett.
Sorry. Commendations. So kind of going back and remembering where we were actually a little over a year ago. Matt had worked with 2 different demographers, and he's going to talk about that in a little bit. But you had asked as a board, which is not common, but I think was really wise to actually have 2 demographers. So we had Les Kendrick and Davis Demographics do a demographic study for us. When we stepped back and looked at all of those, the Davis demographic version 2 of the multiple versions seemed to be the one that we felt would probably reflect best going forward the trends in our community, knowing our community. And so we just wanted to put this back up there because then this became our kind of water level as we started thinking about planning for the future, not just for the years ahead from a budget perspective, but where might we be in 3, 5, and 10 years? And so I think that when you break it down in the way it's pulled out into that second table there towards the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that our head count is almost exact with where Davis demographic is this year. In other words, Davis demographics on version 2 was projecting for kindergarten through 5th grade 1,543 students, and we came in this year at 1,538. So we're only off by 5 students. Where it's a little bit different then is when you start comparing FTE. So if I go to the high school, 1,453 was the projection. We're at 1,455. So from a head count, the number of bodies coming to school, we're almost right on. The delta then comes in our FTE for students who are not enrolled in 6 or 7 periods a day, but rather are in either Running Start or an online course or taking a course somewhere else. So that's really where that 55 delta is. But the middle school is actually a little bit up from where Davis demographics thought we'd be. I think that's because our 6th grade came in larger than we thought. And if you'll recall in the last board meeting, that 6th grade class is our largest of the 3 classes right now at Islander Middle School. But I think it's important that what we brought to you and you looked at all that data too, both in our committee, but also as a board, that version 2, I think is a solid version that we should continue to depend upon.
Question on that. So for the high school, I read the methodology, was it computed for head count rather than FTE? As in, should we see that gap remain consistent in future years? Or is the fact that it's off by 55 worrisome in terms of projections just being, 1 year, out, which is usually the most accurate?
Yeah, they do FTE on their projections where we're not as worried as we are. I think we have to go back to attract, retain, return. How do we continue to attract students, retain them and have them return? And then from a budget perspective, even more so than probably the demographics, that 55 isn't huge in terms of facilities, but it is huge on the budget side. So I think it's more of a, I won't go so far as a concern, but it is a point of emphasis as we're heading out to the schools. You're heading out to schools this, I think, in the next couple of weeks.
Correct. We've headed out this past week, next week in regards to looking at enrollment for next year. And this is something we monitor and calculate into what FT will look like as we meet with the principals and administrators. So it's a point. It's something we monitor and closely look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's 55 is large.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll just ask, I thought typically the sort of like enrollment process for next year didn't happen until that later in the year, but can families enroll now if they know for sure they're coming into the district?
Yes, although what we're doing now is trying to take their information. And then as soon as we have kindergarten information night, that's really when we roll over to the next year. That's next week, 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
So yes, and we've already heard from some families who are intending to enroll. On our enrollment page, just to kind of dovetail a little bit, we've also updated our enrollment page. Ian worked on it last week where we now have a feature where when you click on our enrollment page, it pops up. If at any time you have questions about enrollment during this, click here, they go to a Google form. That Google form gets emailed to Ian and Nuria upstairs. They answer within 24 hours and then send it out to the right person. So we're really trying to improve our customer service for new families as well.
I think what might also help is, especially with our high school numbers and, just having gone through all this, with what counts as Mercer Island and what doesn't count as Mercer Island, and the fact that, if our kids are in 5 classes, we lose, and that's where a lot of that number comes from, and educating our families on what helps the district and what hurts the district. I have found that when people approach me and say, on a more personal basis, like, I don't want to take money away from the district, but my kid needs something different. So do I do MI online or do I do, that other big program that a lot of students do for math, and kind of what are options? And I can talk about what's worked for my family, but I have found that people are really concerned about the numbers budget wise for the district. And if we can educate that MI online, we might get a smaller, but we're still getting. And then, when you pull out and do something different, we're not getting it all. And I have found that people really care about that. I think it's also much more cost effective for families to do MI online and then get, additional resources than paying tuition. for an entirely other program. So we could talk about, that's a more personal thing, but, and I'm happy if anyone ever wants to reach out to me on a personal basis, I'm happy to give my experience, not a board experience, but I have found that, going through the district, at least for my child, has been really effective. And a much better fit for her than going out of district. And so I think that, high school families, in meeting our students' different needs in different subjects, they want to be a part of the Mercer Island community and making sure that it's a combo, making sure that their individual student needs are met and making sure that, they remain as connected both fiscally and, emotionally to the Mercer Island district.
Absolutely.
So I think people really do care.
Yep.
And are considering that.
And I think that as we're doing, I made a note of that because as we're doing our parent nights at the middle school and high school and others of just reminding people and, of what options are available that are still MISD. So thank you. This is a slide that withdrew, yes.
Can I just jump in to say, and, just for the public who probably did not watch our meeting with our legislators, that's an issue that, Director Lurie brought up with our state reps and state senator that, maybe it would be possible to change the way that we're allowed to count students, that it would be really nice if we could count every student who we are actively managing as a student in our district as a student, regardless of whether they're taking 4 classes or 6 classes, because there is like that overhead of like administrating them and providing college counseling services and things like that. So that's something that's kind of like been discussed.
I haven't seen a bill yet, but Representative Sen didn't, she thought I was looking, I would love to change the funding formula for the state, but that's a big bite of the apple. No, that's like the entire apple. Let's take a little bite first. So I think she seemed very supportive of that. I don't know that it would happen this session, but who knows? So even addressing the
Head count.
yeah, the head count issue, at least even for just the
Just for the purpose of
for the levies,
yeah.
rather than the entire, but it's one step in the right direction, and then it's just easier to make those big changes once you're already moving that way.
Yeah. That's 60 students. If you just look at this, even though it may not be exactly accurate as of today, but when we pull the data, that's 60 students times $3,100. Even right there.
And our running, I'm not even positive how our running start kids are included in that, right?
They are included in the head count,
Yeah.
and then some of the
We lose that.
FTE delta is also
We
lost.
get some, but not
Correct.
the,
It's less about an FTE per se, it really comes into percentages on state apportionment of them. This is a slide that's been helpful, I think, for the committee. It was helpful when we were out with the community, and I think, as we've been coming back to this table, I think it's well suited in our plan. It really provides that update that Brandy was talking about a little bit ago, and just shows when was a facility built, and then how long did that facility operate before there was really a major renovation. And so the green is when, the number of years that it was operating, and then the black taking over, that it still stands, but that that it had a significant update. But when you look at it, as we were pointing out earlier, it's been since the mid-90s, since we really had a bond that updated facilities in a major way. We've been updating, that's been through the capital tech projects, and we're gonna talk more about that later on in the meeting. The ones that are obviously haven't been updated, this building, Mary Way Pool, MOT, it's newer, when we added that, in the maintenance shop, and then of course the IMS and Northwood builds. We will be having conversations just as a prelude, as a future topic. This will probably be some work that Director Glowitz, Director Lurie, the mayor, deputy mayor, city manager, and myself start talking about here in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And that is some of our interlocals. We have had one with Mary Way Pool. That has been a commitment from the city to help with the operating costs. And so we're going to be talking about that. And then also talking about the projects that we have planned at Mary Wade Pool or will be planning using the $2 million that we committed from CapTech, as well as the $2 million that the county has pushed forward. Just as a reminder, we had a little bit of a hesitation to take that money because they wanted us on a 30-year commitment. Since they reduced that to 10, we feel more comfortable. So that's gonna get a renovation. I don't know if it's gonna qualify as major, but it's gonna be a renovation at least, or an update, or maybe some
What we
improvement,
call it,
enhancements,
yeah.
enhancements, so.
So, we shared with the committee and with the community the bond and levy successes, really kind of the significant capital work that's been done since 2010. I think this was one of your slides with the community, and these are really in your tenure, Fred, what's been accomplished. So, Boys and Girls Club, full renovation and addition to the music wing at the high school. That's kind of the one area of the high school that has been redone since it was originally built. The 2014 bond covered Northwood, phase 1 of Islander Middle School, and then those 3 small additions at the end of each wing at the high school. We followed that with secure vestibules at all 3 of the older elementaries and the high school. We've replaced the stadium turf. We've done re-roof projects on the high school, Crest, Lake Ridge, and the older portion of IMS, the 100, 200 buildings. We've added the first of the EV charging stations to the bus lot. And then we were able to create that culinary classroom and the library remodel a couple of years ago up at the high school. And then most recently, kind of the carpet and paint refresh in the Performing Arts Center. So a lot of CapTech work, but a little bit of bond work in there as well. And we're gonna talk more about both of those today.
Fred's making a note that South Mercer Play Fields is missing.
Oh, that was a big one.
That was a big one.
I didn't jump 2 slides ahead. did I?
Nope.
No, okay. So, the committee took in all of this information, right? Capacity and utilization and demographics and the need at all the different buildings. And worked to create kind of 3 potential scenarios, and we added a 4th. Of what a future bond might look like based on all the things, all the 16 hours at that point, whatever it was of information they had taken in. Scenario A was finish the middle school and create an elementary school at a larger capacity to enable future consolidation potentially. Address a portion of the need at the high school. So this wasn't addressing everything that is on that needs list, but we priced all of those things and this assumed we would do about 40% of it. And then there were some mandatory projects for the energy upgrades that are required by code, and then some ADA issues at this building and a few other small things. Scenario B was tackle both elementaries right out of the gate and be potentially finished with elementary schools. Scenario C was to finish the middle school and do some select projects at the high school. And again, those mandatory and other projects. And then scenario D was 1 elementary only in the high school. So this is, we shared this with you before we took it out for the community outreach. And I think, what we heard a lot about consolidation for sure. And what you're gonna hear from Josh today is, kind of once you set the consolidation component aside, what else did we hear related to these items? The other piece of information that we shared with the committee is what those plans might mean in terms of a total bond cost and a total tax implication. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, along with obviously school financing, kind of 101 we presented to the group, obviously demographics and a ton of information we shared over the course of those many meetings. We also wanted to take a look at if and when we presented a bond to the community, what would the tax implication be? What would the tax rates look like? So we provided the tax rates for obviously here, 2023. What was the total pie, if you will, of said Mercer Islander that pays taxes? And where does the money go to? In this case, for us locally with our district, we saw about $1.29 for 1,000 of assessed valuation, and is what they would pay to us, the school district. 40 cents of that goes to the payment of the bond, or as we know, it's debt service fund, that 2014, 2015, almost $100 million, and 40 cents of that goes there. 54 cents goes to the EP&O levy. That's the levy that is vital and critical to subsidize what the state doesn't pay to us. And then 35 cents is for our cap tech levy.
Just on this slide, we had really positive feedback. I was with a number of families from MIPA with Heidi Christensen down at Lake Ridge earlier this week doing a preschool parent meeting. And kind of one of their questions was around, their pre-questions was around this, and I had shown this to them. And this really helped to resonate with them, especially with people who say, well, we pay all these taxes, why aren't our schools, why do we hear about budget issues and things, and trying to help explain that. And that I think for our new families coming, this was really helpful, Matt, on this one. So
Excellent. And then on that note, March 28th, of course, on the budget schedule, we'll be sharing the updated 2024 tax pie chart. King County gets that to us usually mid-February, end of February. So we'll update that and provide that to you at a future board meeting. The next slide here, I won't get too deep into this because our partners here, Mr. Swanson and Ryan, will share an updated profile here. But we looked at if we were to go out in 2025 at say round up to $120 million bond, what would the tax impact be? So we had the previous slide. We looked at what would the future hold if we were asking for $120 million bond from our community. And then the third, we want to be really cognizant of tax impact, tax burden, compounded levies and taxes on our community. So myself and Brandy and Ryan banged our heads together and took a look at what would a schedule look like for an election calendar, potential bond. So we weren't kind of stepping on community's toes, and what would the schedule look like? So that's what we have in front of us here. Notice we have obviously red as the EP&O levy, red because that's vital. We really truly cannot function as a district and we have to pass that levy every 4 years. And obviously every 6 years, we have our cap tech levy there in yellow. The potentiality of a transportation levy, though nothing is set in stone at this point. And then moving forward, if we did a 3 to 4 phase of bond request, what would that look like over the course of the years?
So taking the presentations out to our community, some of you were in attendance at those in some of our evenings, but I just go back to the listening sessions that you did as a board when you were selecting a new superintendent. A clear message to me in my first year of saying, we really want to see a communication plan as part of this. And what I hope is that the community sees that your expectations based on what you heard from the community are actually being put forward, and that we are out in the community. And so that was a big piece of making sure we were not just out with one segment, but we were out with opportunities at the community center, in the schools with the staff, in our schools with parents, going to PTA meetings and others, just so that everyone had opportunities to participate in the process.
Yeah, question about some of the stacked bonds. Is that going to be addressed with the refinancing, or is now the appropriate time since the slide sort of shows that sequence?
Yes, absolutely. We will. Refinancing will be a wonderful thing if we can have market rates hold in there, but it won't have a huge impact on restructuring the bonds. 2 reasons. One, it's not of this equivalent size. And number 2, Washington state law does not allow you to restructure as you would your home mortgage. Yeah, you can't have an extension of the term and you have to have positive savings annually.
So
Yeah, so I mean, when will we sort of dive in to how often, what the maturity rate of various bonds are, how frequently you see a cadence or sequence that has been outlined in slide 16, which at least strikes me as a little bit more unusual. I mean, I think that if one is looking for large amounts in a bond, sort of the expectation and what we historically have done is one that is a longer duration. And this, I mean, strikes me a little bit, I don't know the appropriate analogy, but get someone pregnant and then sort of see what comes. And it just seems a little bit more unusual in terms of like having large amounts stacked. And so I want to see, what sort of other districts have done that I could look to.
And I have absolutely included that in the presentation this
Okay.
afternoon.
Okay, that's what I
Bear
was
with
wondering.
me.
I wasn't sure, like,
Yeah.
okay, got it.
We get two scenarios for you.
Okay.
So, as part of our outreach was also, an intentional survey, that we put out there and sought feedback, from our families, especially as the conversations were really running some parallel tracks between appetite to rebuild schools and invest in our schools and consolidation. And so I'm gonna bring in Josh here. I'll stop sharing, Josh, and, turn it over to you to kind of talk about the feedback that we received. And we gave a similar presentation to our committee, but we haven't given this presentation to you as a board. So I know Director Glowitz and Director Lurie, you've seen this, but we'll bring everyone up to speed.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So this presentation is going to go over that very high level overview of what the survey respondents said. We'll talk a little bit about who responded, the quantities that responded from each various categories, and where their responses fell. Please interrupt me with your questions as we go. And if I'm not being clear again, stop me and tell me. So the survey was administered between October 10th and November 14th, and we had a total of 568 people. Of those, we had 97% of them were all MISD residents, and 84% of the respondents had children in the district. So as we're looking at the results, bear in mind that breakdown that, with only 16% of the people not having children, that we don't know how indicative this will be from a broader community. When we're looking at this, we see that we have a very broad support for the bond. So we got 60%, 61% of all respondents were in favor of the board, with another 18% undecided. And you're going to see this 22% that are against the bond. That's going to be a common theme as we look through the various slides. We will see variance between what choices people want. We'll see a little bit of variance between yeses and undecideds, but we're going to see that no remains pretty stable throughout everything. So when we start taking a look, we are going to see that like I said, opposition remains the same regardless of whether they have children or not. And this is where I'd like to caution that we're looking at about 90 respondents, 22% make up the no children. So anytime I'm showing comparisons between children and no children, know that the vast majority of respondents were people with children in the district. And we also found that those who did not attend the presentation were more likely to support the bond. Part of the hypothesis when we went through with the committee is that those who attended the survey were those who were looking for more information, and those who supported the bond measure possibly didn't feel the need to go and get more information about it. Hence the less undecided, and they already were supportive, so they didn't feel the need to find out anything more. So as we look at this, getting into a little more nitty gritty about which bond scenario they supported. You're going to see that 35% supported finishing the middle school and making improvements to the high school. That is bond scenario C, with an additional 29% supporting bond scenario A, which is the middle school, high school, and then one elementary school. And then the other category of note would be no improvements no improvements that require a bond. So when
There
you're
was
doing
no
the break,
for all elementaries, were there?
could you say again, please?
There wasn't an option for building 3 new elementaries, were there?
Not in this survey.
Okay.
So when we're looking at this, we can see that 64% of all respondents support, the finishing the middle school and improving the high school. And then it drops, so if we're looking at 64% are going to improve all of those areas. If we want to break it down into those who would also like to do the elementary school, now you can see support drops. 29% would like, 29% of the respondents would also like to improve the elementary schools. So support drops a little bit when you start bringing in the elementaries. So again, support is a little bit stronger with those who have kids than those who do not. So that stays the same. And again, when you don't, for no improvements that require a bond, you're seeing a little bit more for the no children in that area. Okay, so again, when we're looking at attending the presentation, and by pointing out those who attended the presentation, my assumption is that those who attended the presentation are going to be those who are more informed about the options, the reasoning, and everything else. But like I said before, it's also those who are likely less decided on one way or another. But for those who attended the presentation, you are going to see greater support for just supporting the middle school and the high school than a bond that would also include an elementary. Moving on. So this question was one of my favorites that you asked. And what it was asking is, instead of asking what would you support, the question was asking which bond scenario do you think the island community would most support? And research has shown that the wisdom of the crowds, that's what they're calling it, that the wisdom of the crowds might actually be a greater prediction of what the community would support than an actual supporting of themselves. Now, when people start looking at what their neighbors are saying, what they're reading on social media, that they get a really good viewpoint about what's going on in the community and get a broader idea. And like I said earlier, the no improvements needed remains pretty stagnant regardless of how you're asking or how you're breaking it down. But you will see that the community supports just the middle school, high school option, so scenario C, far more than an individual does, meaning 35% of individuals, and I'm sorry, 44% of the community, what do you think my community would like, supports just the high school, middle school option, whereas 35% of the individuals. And that's because the individuals have a greater support for option A, which was adding the elementary. As we break this down a little bit further, you're going to see that, once again, no improvements, not a huge change when we break it down for children versus no children. But support for replacing the elementary school drops. In the what do I like, 30% of respondents with children supported option A, and it dropped to 19 when it started talking about the community. And when you're talking about kids without, or people without kids, it dropped from 23% support for an elementary option down to 16%. Same thing happened when we started looking at those who attended the presentation versus those who did not, except it was actually a little bit more severe. So when we polled those who attended the presentation, 27% of those who attended thought that they would support fixing up the elementary school, option A, but it dropped to 9% when they started asking, what do you think your friends and neighbors would think? And for those who were just an open survey that did not attend the presentation, support for the elementary school dropped from 34% down to 24%. So when I broke down the favored bond scenario by schools, It pretty much mirrored what the overall response was in the slides that I showed you prior, with the exception of especially Northwood Elementary and to a lesser degree, West Mercer Elementary. You can see that that replacing the elementary school really had a much broader support at those two schools than they did at the other ones, actually exceeding the option C. And you can see the sample size as well. So you're looking at Northwood Elementary and West Mercer, much smaller sample size than the other four schools. And then this a little bit different scenario when you ask those same schools. So the same schools, this is what your favorite bond scenario was. When you ask those same schools, what would your community like? Now we get the options that we're used to seeing, where option C is by far the most popular. So these last few slides I'm going to show, we did talk about them at the committee, but my understanding is that this has already been taken off the table, that the community is definitely not in favor of consolidation. They are firmly against it. 61%, 348 out of 568 respondents are against consolidation. And when you start looking, I'm sorry, take a side note. The one exception to that, again, is Northwood Elementary that had the smaller sample size, but they actually would be in favor of consolidation over the other options. And then consolidation, you're going to see that it does have continued study of consolidation has more support amongst those who did not attend the presentation than those who did. And if we dug into the data a little bit more, we would also find that if consolidation was on the table, support for the bonds start to drop as well. So consolidation is very unpopular with the community.
Question, because they're just 3 bond options and one of those really isn't a bond option because it's no bond. I mean, couldn't the way that opposed be for or against consolidation? I think many in the community would see renovating or replacing one elementary and not the 2 other as weighing or putting a finger, definitely committed to one elementary school, but perhaps not to 2 others for consolidation down the line. So stated differently, the 3 bond options could be sort of seen as a question on, do you support consolidation or not? Which I think the community, as we said, overwhelmingly does not support consolidation. So I mean, I wonder in terms of the bond options, how much really it does reflect the view of what the best option is, since it's really, in my view, to some extent, a question of do you support consolidation?
So
Go ahead, Josh.
no, please.
I was just gonna say, I think that it is hard to know how it does, it was hard to tease that out in the survey because of how invested the community was in solving the consolidation question. So with that off the table, perhaps another way of saying what you are, Director Glowitz, is with consolidation off the table, then what would these numbers look like as people were looking at the different options if it were improvement of an elementary school with no consideration of consolidation, or 2 elementary schools, or 3 eventually? Is that where you're kind of going with that? And we don't know from this data.
We don't know. I mean, my intuition is that it would be much closer if the question was to renovate or to rebuild 3 elementary schools. And there was no question of whether consolidation was a consideration.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, I had a related question that maybe this is a good time to bring it up. Well, Dr. Glowitz has raised his question, but to what extent do you think the negative feeling against the bond was because of the ill will in the community about consolidation? Like I feel like at some of our feedback meetings, the community was pretty fired up, and then you're like, well, do you want to give us more money? And the answer was, well, no. But I wonder if now that consolidation is firmly off the table, if the picture of like approval for the bond would look quite different. especially when, if the community had a clear understanding of how we would then pay for renovations and improvements to all 4 elementary schools.
Absolutely. I think that's what we feel like, based on those conversations, follow-up conversations. And I think it's an earlier slide, Josh, that shows that 61% approval of a bond, when it, doesn't include an elementary school. Maybe that is giving us an indication of you've taken the consolidation off the table essentially in that one, because you're not talking about that. That's why we saw that approval go up. So I do think there's support. I do think there's support even from those who were most vocal about the consolidation piece of, yes, we see the points about middle school and high school. Where we're disagreeing is, if I say anything about a bond that includes with an elementary, we might close a school, then I don't want to say I support it at all. But if you were to take that out, I think we'd see.
I also think you can tell a lot from go back, but from the slide that showed the attitudes at the different elementary schools. And then at Island Park, which is thank you. At Island Park, which was the school that most people felt was most likely to be closed as part of a consolidation process, that the support for finish the middle school, replace one elementary school and make improvements, blah, blah, that option, that was the weakest support at that school, because I think that I think people at Island Park still feel defensive about it, right? It's like, I'm not gonna say yes to anything that might cause like my kid's school to be closed, even having had that taken off the table, it's just like emotions are still kind of settling down. It's like the waters are still kind of muddy a little bit about it. And there's some like hostility kind of and resentment to that idea. And I think that this whole process has been a really great learning opportunity for the district to see is that ever gonna be on the table? I would say right now, my guess would be probably no. Like, it's been very clear that the community really values having their little local schools that their kids can walk to, or bus in 5 minutes to. So that's like obviously none of this effort has been wasted. We learned a lot from this, and we have been steered away from potentially presenting a bond that would really be like resented and not supported by the community. But I do think if this presentation is going the way that I think this presentation is going, it's smart to kind of just like let the dust settle and focus on the things that we know need to be done, that we know the community will support. And then, the schools are not in such bad shape that they're like falling down, tomorrow, the elementary schools, right? So it's like we can afford to plan out longer term for that stuff so that everyone is kind of on board with us and knows what the plan is and knows, in 5 years, whatever, we will be thinking about X, Y, Z. So anyway, that's my take.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think that reading too much into this survey in terms of future ideas
Right.
is not a good idea.
Yeah.
I think that we really talked last year when we were doing the meetings of how do we bring this up with it not taking over the long range, the other issues. And of course, it took over the other issues, which because, it's emotional and it matters. I think it did us a huge benefit that it's on the table now in terms of it's a consideration. It's going to always be a consideration. It's why we believe it should be part of the long range facility plan that the last board said we want to see this as part of the update in terms of what our capacity is. And what our enrollment is. It's, what I heard most from the community, the things that mattered to me the most was elementary families were not over the trauma of COVID. Like, it was more traumatic for those younger kids and parents, frankly, than the older kids were much less impacted in an educational standpoint. They needed more time of stability to recover from that. I think also if we're planning 10 years out, it's not our current students and families in the schools that, when they're making the decision to move to Mercer Island, for the schools, which we know the majority of, at a minimum, consider the schools, at least it's a consideration. If they know if our enrollment continues to do this school is the one that, is off the table. And, maybe by the time we do it, the newest one is the one that, you know, at that point would need the renovations, and that's the one that goes away or whatever. I'm just saying, like, because it's this continuing conversation, it takes away that, meaning no disrespect with this word, but that freak out moment of people like, don't do this, which is valid, but we shouldn't have, I don't want, not excuse, but we shouldn't have that reason anymore. Like, it's on the table. We need to give a couple more years to see what enrollment does. We are confident that they're demographers, that we have an idea of what it's gonna do, but the community doesn't, and that's okay. We've got a few years. I mean, I know we're gonna hear proposals, but you know, we have a few years to take a deep breath and see what is enrollment actually gonna do with the building on the island that we might see or not. And I think this is a really good time. But in terms of predicting how people feel about things, the consolidation was so enmeshed in this data that I give very, very little weight to anything else other than we heard from these current families, they don't want consolidation. It's significant and it means it's not the right answer right now, but I think that's all that means right now. And when I say now, I mean, you know, for the foreseeable future.
To the extent that, you know, we're looking, which I know we are, at demographics, how do we square that the elementary levels are the most stable and predictable, and those that we show the steepest declines in are middle school and high school, yet the argument seems to be, let's wait on elementary until we have a greater insight into what the demographics are doing and proceed ahead with the middle school and high school. And I get that it's somewhat not apples to oranges because there's just one facility for each of those grade levels. But at the same time, when we see the declines that are predicted, and again, it's hard to say what's gonna happen in the future, it just seems a little bit incongruent, I guess.
I think in my mind on those questions, I think that's why, when we're looking to, as you see in the slides, and we'll get to this later, to finish the middle school, that it's not finishing at even where the capacity was when we originally built the first half of it, that it's a smaller capacity, but how do we improve that facility? You know, do we consider that black box theater that we've talked about? So it becomes also about program and not just capacity. And I think the same is for the high school. I think it's about updating some science rooms that haven't been updated, thinking about our performing arts center, thinking about our radio, which has outgrown its space, and our print, our print journalism that needs, so to me, it's less about capacity as it is about programmatic and student experience.
And I think that certainly, and maybe we'll get to the numbers, and the question is, certainly we can do programmatic enhancements within the cap tech levy. I mean, as the South playing fields is culinary arts in the high school. And I guess the question is, you know, how much money is in there for programmatic updates, you know, whether that's to the PAC, to radio broadcast, et cetera. And perhaps a little bit from a bond, but doesn't necessarily make sense for a bond to be focused on those programmatic enhancements, rather than elementary schools, now that consolidation has been taken off the table.
And I think that we'll get to for sure, for you to be able to have that conversation as a board, based on that.
And I think that, I think that my personal opinion is that our numbers do justify enrollment numbers justify consolidation. They justify it. Community said no, and that matters just as much in terms, you know, and maybe if I had a student that would be impacted, I would feel different as a parent. But just because the enrollment numbers justify it, doesn't mean it's the right time to do it. So I think the community was loud and clear, it's not the right time. And then it also actually will benefit us when we do new replacements to the elementary schools. It gives us that flexibility in terms of the classrooms, as we saw in the capacity, we're so under capacity. And we likely are going to be even more under capacity. It gives us that flexibility to move kids around during those replacements, however that might be done. It benefits us now to keep those options open. But I think the community voice in terms of the consolidation is as good a reason as any not to do it now. But it doesn't mean that the enrollment numbers, if someone was looking at this, statistics only, it does justify it, which is why it was on the table. So, but that's not the only consideration. So, I mean, people have to be ready to do it, or there's a lot of resentment. I mean, I think it's better to do it with the community than force it on them.
There'll be whenever we go to replace West Mercer, Island Park, or Lake Ridge. There will be an impact on those students and those families, and whether or not that's because we're building on site while the students are there and their playground becomes, shrinks considerably, or we have to move them to another school temporarily. And I think the piece of the concern about any sort of disruption to our elementaries, the COVID piece came up a number of times, and just trying to think about how to create as much normalcy as possible factors in. But, I think it's a perfect conversation as we get into the morning. Yeah. Josh, other thoughts that you have?
No, I think you guys are, you've well discussed this and you have the information. I think that, like you said, the community has spoken pretty clearly on the consolidation now. I have nothing else to add on that.
Gotcha. Any other questions for Josh? Thanks for joining us for this journey. I'm sure we're going to be in touch again as we're proceeding through whatever projects we're doing and working with our community, but really appreciate it.
Wonderful. It was nice seeing everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Jeff.
Do we want to take a break now or keep going until the end of this and then take a break?
Let's keep going.
Okay. So we presented lots of information along the way, and then you came to a conclusion as a board, albeit 2 members who aren't here and 2 new members now. As a board, you came to the conclusion that consolidation should be removed from consideration as a variable, that was really something that we needed to pull out. And so the graphic here represents our 6-school model continuing forward. And that went back to a December meeting, I believe. It was the first meeting was it November? From the November meeting.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, sorry, I forgot, and I'm not sharing my screen. Thank you. So looking at the big picture and knowing what do we have in our cap tech budget now, and then what will we forecast collecting over the life of that of the cap tech levy, thinking about needs for our schools and hopes and dreams. I really do think that it was extensive and participatory. Obviously, it's no elementary consolidation at this time, but I think we're bringing forward 2 major pieces to the project. The first one is a cap tech investment. And while we'll have investments going into other buildings, the 3 older elementaries are the ones that we have not put money into for a number of years, always wondering if one's going to be replaced and is it a good investment. Even when we re-roofed Lake Ridge 3 summers ago now, somewhere in there, we want to make sure we get our monies out of this. And yet at the same time, it's just something we have to do. And we have those same improvements now at all of the buildings. Carpet has not been redone since the 90s. And some others. Tony and Brandy will get into this in a moment, but I think one phase of this project is a heavy investment with our cap tech dollars. The other one would be a potential April 2025 bond. So looking forward, basically 15 months or so, 14, 15 months from now, would be a potential bond, and that bond would focus on our middle school, finishing that, and then our high school. And allowing us to probably do more enhancements on a quicker timetable than we could with our cap tech, given the other improvements that our schools need. So those are really the two channels that we'd be talking about as far as, kind of moving forward.
So,
Yep,
sorry, maybe are we gonna get to slide 22 or?
I just don't have the
Okay,
numbers.
The reason is, it seems that there hasn't been consideration really given to a 3 elementary replacement. And as soon as we, in the cap tech, recarpet the elementaries this summer, I think that we'll have the tendency to remove that from the table by saying that dollars have already been, put into these schools. Now is not the time to replace them. I'm of the view, and I think, at least one other, previous board member was similarly of the view that, visiting the facilities, elementary seems the most visibly in need of improvements. I am reluctant to, at this point, until that conversation has at least been had, to put dollars into the elementary school this year. Just not to short circuit that conversation.
Got it. So why don't we go into, just to bring everyone up to speed, then why don't we go right into what our plans would be for the Caltech levy? Just so everyone sees that, we'll talk it through. And then what we can do is talk about the bonds here, and then let's take a break and then come back and allow you as a board to have that exact conversation. So let's go Caltech levy.
So this spreadsheet really just identifies where we propose to spend funding at each of the schools over the next 3 summers. And our approach in this has been to treat all 3 elementary schools the same. So if we're going to carpet one school, we carpet all 3. There isn't a clear decision about the long-term solution for any one of those schools. And honestly, much of this work is 10 years overdue. And we, as Dr. Mundell mentioned, we have put this off year after year after year, thinking something's going to happen at the elementary school, and some of it just can't wait any longer. So the only difference that you see between the elementary schools is the roofing. And then there's a slight component to the amount of parking lot they have and how much is assigned to that. But basically, each elementary school this summer in 2024 would get a full carpet replacement. There would still be places like the multi-purpose room and restrooms and those things that retain their flooring material, but all the classrooms and corridors and many offices in the library would all get carpeted. We would replace the boilers at each of the 3 elementary schools. This is an opportunity in time to do a like-for-like replacement of the boilers that are there without having to fully upgrade the buildings to the heat pumps. And we would go in and clean up parking lots, reseal, some asphalt repair, and then restripe everything. So that includes, fire lanes and loading zones and stall definition. And then we need to come in and also do a classroom door security upgrade. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
So over the last several years with the lockdown security, we've tried some different solutions on how to lock classroom doors from inside the classroom. We've tried some little flip latches that would hold the door just slightly ajar so it wouldn't lock. So the door could remain locked. If we went into a lockdown, the teacher could flip the little thing up. The problem we have with that is the door doesn't make a complete fire seal. So the fire department did have some issues with that as far as being code compliant. We later went to a magnetic strip that covered the hole in the door jamb, so the door could close. The problem with that is if we did have a fire, that the fire builds pressure in the room, it could then swing the door open if that wasn't removed. These were very cheap fixes for a very, serious problem of locking down the doors. We felt that that was what we were going to try to solve. Fire department's been very supportive. It wasn't like they came in and said, absolutely not. They understand where we're at. It's not a cheap fix to replace every one of those cartridges and retrofit the door. I mean, it's several $100, $600-700 per door just to put these new cartridges in. So that's why we've been kind of waiting to see what we're doing. But the time has come to where we really felt that this was the right time to go ahead and make those changes, become back in compliant with the fire code. And every teacher would have the ability then to lock their door from the inside using their classroom key.
So that would occur at each of the older elementary schools this summer. And then West Mercer would be re-roofed this summer. And then in 2025, we would re-roof Island Park. In addition, there's work at the high school. We need to put a secure vestibule in for Crest. It has some parking lot work. We have those big roll-up doors in the commons, both, there's the kitchen and then the hallway and the deck of doors that all need to be replaced. Those are fire doors. So it's not just a roll-up garage door, it's tied into the fire alarm system and they have to drop in the event of a fire. And those are all original. We have some energy upgrades that we need to do at the high school. And then we have our Department of Ecology, landscaping maintenance that's required. Middle school gets very little in anticipation of replacement. And there, we have some small things, the bus lot, we're continuing to work on infrastructure design to be able to power the entire lot. Right now we have 4 capacity for 4 buses. So we're doing design work and Puget Sound Energy work there. Mary Waite Pool. Dr. Rundle mentioned that there's the King County grant. We've been able to negotiate that down to 10 years. So potentially we have design work associated with that. And then we have a little bit of furniture work at the elementary school. So that would be our big push this summer. Next summer, we would come in and we would paint half of the classrooms and all the corridors at all 3 elementary schools. And the following summer in 26, we'd come back and paint the other half of the classrooms. The high school, we reviewed all this and vetted it with principals. And one of the things that the high school feels is really important is that we start to tackle some of the furniture replacement. Tables instead of the combo desks that weigh 75 pounds a piece. That's an exaggeration, but they are heavy. So we've got that plugged in. We have a very defined amount that we can spend each year out of the CapTech fund. And so we're working closely within that budget to make sure that we comply. And then over on the right, I've shown you kind of the 3-year total. And I think, there's a lot of curiosity about at the committee level with the facilities planning committee about what does it cost to make that kind of an investment in the elementary schools? And so Island Park and West Mercer are both about 1.7 is what we put into those. And then Lake Ridge is about $1 million. And that's because it's already been re-roofed. That was really the delta between those. And, you had asked Dan about, putting those CapTech dollars towards the program kind of elements. And I think these are the kinds of things we can do with CapTech. We did manage to, gut the library and recarpet it and paint. But when it comes to things like a science room renovation or, a significant renovation of the radio program and all the technology that goes with that, I don't think there's enough in this CapTech budget to be able to accomplish the other things that we have to do and to be able to make those kind of significant improvements.
What about PAC? I mean, I think in an earlier slide, it looked like some of the, line items added up to about $2 million, which is still about a third of the South Mercer playing fields. Given the number of students that the PAC accommodates and is used by.
I think the PAC will be a big part of the conversation about the program improvements at the high school? There's a lot of need.
But certainly we've done some program improvements like the playing fields without waiting.
Let's not compare.
Without, I'm not
Let's talk
comparing it.
about our needs.
My point is we've done $6 million in improvements without waiting for a bond when it was seen as a need. I don't see why that, I mean, EV charging, for instance,
It
we don't-
wasn't seen as a need.
well, hold on, we don't know what's coming down the pipeline in terms of state support. Now that you have the cap and trade and Inslee, and there's a big momentum for the state to pay for some of those infrastructure improvements. It just strikes me that given some of the recent expenditures that we've made out of Cap Tech, and considering how much we've heard from PAC, to say that to sort of position it perhaps that the only way we're gonna see improvements in PAC is with a bond that focuses on the middle school and high school. I'm not sure that that's.
I think what we would say is if we didn't have a bond to do anything, we've got things at our elementaries that we haven't invested in at all, and so we're gonna have to invest in our elementaries. If it is, let's say, you as a board decide, you know what, none of the middle school and high school pieces are as important as an elementary, let's just do one elementary bond, we'll still have two elementaries that we've got to invest in. My wonder is how much money will really there be in the Cap Tech to go around? Our Cap Tech, when that board was making a decision about South Mercer Playfields, our Cap Tech reserves at that point had grown considerably. And we have really been committed to making sure that we spend that money. We spend it in a way that the community will benefit, but we no longer have that same reserve that we had going into that decision. And our intention is to try to keep a reserve in our Cap Tech always in case there's a catastrophe. But not upwards of the 14 million that were in there at one point, to keep it more between the 3 to 5 million. Or even spending it down to the $2 to $4 million that would be there. So I think it's scope. The Performing Arts Center is an interesting conversation. I just met with two of the band boosters yesterday. And we've got some meetings planned with them about a variety of topics. And you know, it goes back, you know, what can never not creep in when we're talking about fine arts and whatnot is you know, MICA or that past. And I think when we look at what can we do with our existing facilities, the middle school, we could definitely add something in the middle school that I think would enhance drama and smaller performing arts. There are things that I think we can do into our PAC. We've done some visits at Cornish College of the Arts where they've done some things with sound that are gonna take pretty big investments in there. We'd love to redo the seats, but I think when it's redo the seats or something else, maybe the seats aren't as important. But I don't disagree, Director Glowitz, that an investment in our Performing Arts Center is long overdue, and not just curtains and the what do you, the scrim, but the experience. And the experience is the sound, it's the visuals, it's the lighting. I really do believe that a more impressive, not just visually, but the experience of a performing arts center, especially when I look around the region, I am committed to that for sure. If we decide not to do a bond, we may have to shuffle some things around here. It just becomes a priority conversation.
So wait, I just wanna get us back on track. You're 6 miles ahead of the rest of the board. You were on the facilities planning and on the previous board. So we need to respect the entire board and hear this presentation because we're not all on the same page. So I'm asking you respectfully to just pause on these minutia. In terms of the capital, this is like what, 6 million, 5 million? Versus replacing elementary schools, which the community said, don't do this now, period, regardless of the consolidation because of the impact on our students. We're talking I think I'm being conservative by saying $500 million to replace 3 elementary schools, give or take 100 million either way. Yes, we are. So that we're talking upgrading some facilities. I also really urge all of us, including the community, let's stop pitting kids against each other. We've got sports fields, we've got performing arts, we've got STEM, we've got CREST. We have all of these facilities that serve each one of our students, and many benefit from more than one. We don't need to compare the needs of one student to the needs of them all. Our commitment as a public education institute is to meet the needs of all of our students. If we had unlimited funds, we would do everything. We don't. We had we had fields and sports teams that didn't have regulation fields. To say now, after it's been done, because you're hearing other voices in your ears, to say that wasn't a need is just, it's just not okay.
I did not
And
say it
it's,
wasn't a
you
need.
you did just say that. And so.
I said it was a
just-
need to be addressed.
It was a need that needed to be addressed. It was a different circumstance. We had money, extra money in capital facilities because of COVID, because things weren't happening. So we had this opportunity to do this. So I need you to pause on the nitpicking of this so that we can have a board discussion. There's 5 of us here, and we all need to be moving along together. And thank you. And Maggie Ty.
I have thoughts I'd love to share about performing arts stuff, but I'm gonna hold that until the next
Thank you.
actual discussion. But since we're on, if we could go back to the slide that shows the red tops, just one back, I think. Yeah, like the Cap Tech, the summer. Yeah, that one, the 3-year plan, thank you. Like, those things all sound very necessary. And I think I have a high opinion of Mercer Island parents and voters. I don't think they are dumb. I don't think that we should be trying to manipulate them by letting the elementary schools get into a more visible state of disrepair so that they'll be like, oh, these carpets are really grody. Definitely, I want to vote to replace this elementary school, a couple years down the line. I think we want to keep our kids healthy and safe in every way possible. And that's what a lot of these things get to. Not every single one, but a lot of these things get to. So I think we all understand that it's part of our financial stewardship of the district to do things like replace the boilers so that we don't end up with like a humongous flood or some kind of enormous plumbing problem that causes, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of digging up on school grounds, we have to do these things so that we are in financial shape to do other things later, so that's just my take. I think you keep just like with your home, you keep things as well maintained as you can until it's time to do something more drastic and you have the funds to do something more drastic.
The other thing I would add to that thinking is that, I have come to the board in September of every year with this matrix of all the things that we have built into this plan moving forward. And for 9 years at least, carpet, West Mercer has been on the list, right?
Yeah.
And when the levy was passed, it replaced the boilers and replaced the carpet, has been on that list for a very long time. And we've told the community that's something we're going to do. And certainly that plan, new things come on and some things go off, there's some things get put off. Each year it changes a little bit, but we've done a lot of things that weren't originally included in the plan. And we haven't done a lot of the things that we said we were gonna do, that really need to be done.
In part because we've got such great maintenance crews on they've been nursing these boilers.
Easy, oh, yeah.
And maybe Tucker, Director Tucker, I mean, our boilers were slated for 15 years when we built the schools. That was their life expectancy, okay? What are we, 28 years down the road, and we're
Yeah.
still milking these things along?
Yeah.
I can't make promises.
Right.
As Brandy said, the carpet has been needed to be replaced for a number of years. When would a new elementary school come online? It's not gonna come online next year. It's not gonna come online in the next 2 or 3 years. So we have to look at, can this carpet really last that much longer? So there's some thought that went into this, that the sooner we can get this, the more money we can then get out of it, because we're trying to get it in place now. So we did really put a lot of thought into how we, phase these different projects. But what's on the list for this year, it really is a lot of, there is life safety in there that as we look at it under the big umbrella that we really do need to address.
I guess you convinced me, but I just want to be clear that I don't see this as a reason that replacing elementary schools should not be on the table. And for those at home, I mean, in Renton, there was a 600 student elementary that was recently built for 68 million. If you say 3% of 68 million, that works out to about 2 million a year just in interest or carrying cost. So like these expenditures are far under that. So if one could just think about it, it's still saving money than if we were to embark upon constructing a new elementary school by just delaying a year or two.
And I think that goes to the questions you're gonna have for Ryan later on, which is the stacking of bonds. Because it becomes a not if they need to be replaced, it's when. And when to do that, and that's a critical conversation. Because if you are as a board in support of that exploration of a bond 14 months from now or 15 months from now, we did want to kind of give you a timeline of what that means in terms of getting ready for something like that. So I'm going to have Brandy talk more about that. And again, not that we're still not at the point of saying what should the bond absolutely be. We're bringing to you forward what we think is where a direction. You might want to tweak that, or you may have different ideas, but do you want to just talk about what we have ahead of us if we're looking at April 25?
So April of 25, would mean that, we would need to select architects during the months of February and March. In April and June, we would work with, April, May, and June, we would work with, staff at both the high school and the elementary, the middle school, for whatever projects we define, to create, update the educational specifications. So at the middle school, that might mean what is the number of classrooms that are needed based on student enrollment? Are there things that weren't in the original ed spec for that building that need to be added, like a black box? And how are the science rooms performing? And, tweak that a little bit. Work on the site plan, how that fits. And what we're doing in all of that is trying to get it to a point through the summer and into the fall where we can really put a real cost estimate. Everything that was to the work and everything that was done with the facilities planning committee was done on a very, round numbers, X amount per square foot kind of number with a certain amount of markup. And at least in my experience with this community, before they will pass a bond, they want to be very clear about what it is, what it looks like, and they want to see a detailed cost breakdown for the overall project that is defendable. And so the idea would be to work through that and be able to come back to this board with some very clear plans supported by staff, teachers, community people in November, so that you were prepared if you wanted to place a bond on the April ballot to do that. We also estimate that the cost to do that will be between $1 million and $1.2 million approximately. You saw the red number on the Cap Tech budget, so we have planned that we would pay for that out of Cap Tech, and then we would build it into a bond to reimburse those costs back into the Cap Tech fund.
Can we see just recent projects in King County that have been completed across the board? Because a lot of the bond scenarios had a cost for an elementary school, a 600 one of 120 million, a 451 of like 90+ million. I recently looked at Hilltop Heritage Elementary in Renton, 600 students completed just a few months ago, or at least last year, 2023, was completed for $68 million. I think that figures significantly, which seems like it should be pretty high level.
Yeah.
Of just looking at what are those construction projects in the area to get a sense of what the options are.
So I would say, so for the purposes of this, I think we're at a great decision point as far as how we proceed today. The next steps here are, you know, a board meeting and there's some other stuff, but we're at the end of this here. My question to you as a board is, do you want to have a conversation? Well, we'll take a break. Then do you want a conversation about the bond and what's in the bond, or do you want to learn more about the bonds from Ryan? He can answer a lot of those questions because he works with all the school districts, not all of them, but a lot of them doing this. So do you want to learn more about how all the bonds work, stacking bonds, who's doing bonds or whatnot, or do you want to have a conversation
I
about?
think we need to have a conversation about what's in the bond.
We're skipping things
First.
and I'd like to go back to your presentation.
Yeah.
The whole bond pre-work slide, we need to, the board needs to be on the same page and we're not.
Okay,
There's some of us that have more experience in the work that's been done. So this is a review for some and this is new information for others. So we need to be on the same page.
And I have a question, because I don't know if Tony and Bradley will still be here, or can I ask a quick question for you? So I was seeing, kind of the map that, Matt put, kind of staggered at the one. I think about the capital thing and the environmental requirement that we need to do. You mentioned the boilers and compared to not putting heat pumps, and I know that the heat pumps are more environmental friendly and by eventually be a requirement or not. So do we have to retrofit a lot of the buildings, or can we think kind of the heat pumps or anything that we are doing right now with the capital tech in a way that will be helpful in the future, seeing that the timeline right now, and I know that this is a discussion that we'll have on what will happen, but the last elementary will be rebuilt until 24-ish. So thinking that how the environmental law might change, that if boiler is something that we have to just rethink or things like that, and
The opportunity with the boilers, because these are old buildings with old designs, to go to a heat pump system makes it, 5 times the amount of money, and then there's duct rework and all sorts of things that have to happen in the building, which then creates this larger investment that potentially,
then.
in 5 years is
Yeah, so
taken
the
off.
discussion goes back to.
The buildings still have to, the buildings will still have to meet the energy use index through the Clean Buildings Act. So that will all still be plugged into there as well.
But thank you
But
for asking.
we're concerned with reliability, right, of being able to keep these things.
And the law will keep adding more of that, and so.
They're only gonna get more restrictive.
Okay, thank you, that's good.
why don't we take a break? And then come back, have a conversation about going back through the different levels. We've got middle school, we've got elementary of high school, and then have that conversation next. How long do you want to go for a break?
Is till 11 enough? Does anyone need a little more time?
I'm fine with 11's good, yeah.
Right,
Okay, 11
11
o'clock, perfect.
okay, we're recessed.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Sorry.
Senioritis is just a true disease.
I think, final week in
Oh,
high school is just.
well, it is, except for
And then
seniors,
senior.
where it's like, please go take your test so you can graduate.
Yeah.
Oh.
One time to have.
And, you know, like, get a C.
Tap it.
Like, pass it, yeah. No, it's, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you all know, I mean,
I never graduated high school, so.
yeah, I know. The struggle is real.
And my nightmares, I did.
I literally still have nightmares about law school finals, literally, that is my ongoing bad dream,
Yep.
20+ years later.
I hear you. So resetting the table, of the discussion point, and I think this will be a time when, Ryan will probably try to add context as well, but what we have, after listening to the community, thinking about sequencing or whatnot, in my mind, there's no doubt that perhaps unlike in the past where we've thought about a bond and then don't do anything for a long time and just like put our heads in the sand. I really do think we need to have a strategy long-term, because what I haven't heard from anyone, and even listening to your conversations, is that our elementaries don't need to be redone at some point. There's gonna be that point. So what we are thinking, at least for this kind of next 3 to 5 year period of time, is finish the middle school, but at a smaller footprint than what was perhaps originally drawn in 2013. Then putting a significant investment into the high school. Not sure what the total cost would be or the full scope of that. I think it would depend, it's gonna depend on building costs and how everything comes together with the middle school as well. Do some must-dos in terms of a bond, and then use the capital levy to enhance our elementaries until we're ready to talk about the next bond. Our bonds have typically been, have a bond, wait till it expires, and then decide whether or not, or while it's getting ready to expire, let's see what else we should do now, versus perhaps exploring what it might look like to have more than one bond on the books at a time. A reminder is our 13-14 bonds are coming off the books in 29-30.
14-15.
14-15 bonds, thank you.
I was gonna correct you.
Great. So those are coming up, and so we're kind of going into that world, and so I think I'll turn it over to you as a board to, you know, kind of have that conversation about this as a proposal, and then things that might be missing, or things that we're forgetting about, so I'll turn it back over.
So just kind of the things that we've been discussing is, and then hearing from community groups, is what do we need to do? What do we want to do? So when I've had discussions with different groups, I've really framed it as, what do we need? What do we want? And what's our like pie in the sky dream, right? And then doing those things accordingly. So as we, you know, we're very aware of the middle school needs, maybe not the scope of it, but the need. And then high school, we know we need things, but exactly what do we need and exactly what do we want? And then just in terms of, you know, financial, right? If money wasn't an issue, we would do all the wants, and then even some pie in the sky. And then what else is out there that we should really be considering? Should we be considering an elementary school right now? Do we need to get from the community more now that consolidation's off the table? So looking to start that discussion of kind of how you're feeling, and I'm gonna kind of try and go around just so we make sure that we hear all the voices. So you can pass, but Christina, how are you feeling about all of this? And do you feel like we're covering it, or are we missing? And if so, what are we missing?
My only question will be, if we decide to go for a bond, the first construction, when it would happen. I think that also might shift the conversation with the community, because if right away, I know that a lot of elementary parents, because of COVID and everything, they would like some stability beforehand. But if we know that we're passing about that this construction might happen in 5, 6 years, the conversation might look different with the community, so.
I think it's safe to say it's always at least no sooner than 3 years, even if you know what you're going to do, right? But I think 5 years, 4 or 5 years is,
I think if
we
we were,
decided now.
if we were to pass a bond, hypothetically, if we passed a bond in April of 25, it gets certified in May, we would have at least 18 months of design and permitting. So it's probably, potentially 27 before we actually start construction.
And that would be for any major,
Yeah,
any
anything.
project that we are on this timeline.
Okay, so.
27, no, that's good information to have.
We'll let the conversation.
Okay,
go.
we'll do multiple passes.
Yeah.
Magda,
Yeah, so my thing that's been kind of percolating for me, both when I was preparing for this meeting and I have been talking to people in the community and listening to the conversation so far, is kind of wanting to look at the big picture, especially between the middle school and the high school, of how much continuity kids have in their experience between the middle school and the high school. So I think a really great model of this is like the band and orchestra programs where kids start young and they know that they're going into the middle school where they'll be able to take part, and then they know they're going on to this great program at the high school. And it's always seemed like a shame to me, and I don't know the current state of it, but when one of my kids played the steel drums at Lake Ridge, and then there was no steel drums program and really no space or money for it in middle school, then yeah, there's a program at the high school, but by that point, kids have already developed other interests, they're busy, they've made other commitments, and so a lot of kids then didn't pick it up again in high school. I kind of want to avoid that. I think it would be great for kids, especially for, these are kids still recovering from the pandemic, right? These are kids that still need maybe a little bit extra help with kind of like social stuff and connecting and doing things that aren't just, on their iPad at home alone. And so when we visited the middle school in the fall, I was really struck, for example, by the fact that the cooking club is like the #1 most popular club at the school. And there's no space for that. There's no culinary arts classroom like we have at the high school. They have one little tiny oven in the faculty, lounge or whatever, where there isn't enough room for all the kids who are interested to even take part in the club, much less actually bake something. So a lot of the activities that they've done have been like a cake in a mug that you microwave, which is like all power to the person who's running that program. I can't imagine having dozens and dozens of kids trying to bake and like no facilities to bake in, So that just as we, and maybe this is pie, to me, this is somewhere between like what we would like to do and maybe pie in the sky, but thinking about like, if we really want kids to kind of like take full advantage of what we're offering in the high school, I think we need to set them up for it in the middle school. And cooking, just as one example, is a thing that is really for the whole child. It's like a life skill. It gives kids more independence, it's like social, it's relaxing. It's the kind of thing that like lowers your stress level instead of raising your stress level, and it's not just for girls anymore. I mean, it never really was, but I can tell you I have 2 college-age boys and one knows how to cook and one doesn't. And one of them's eating really healthy and the other one is just living on garbage, basically Doritos, as far as I can tell. So I think about that. And then I also think about the theater program, right? Like and again, all credit and power to the people that are actually producing, musicals and plays and so forth at the middle school. But a black box theater would in fact be fantastic to have in the middle school, but what about a bigger performance space that isn't the cafeteria? Wouldn't it be great for kids to be learning already how to like design sets and do all the kind of stuff that they can do at the high school level? Again, heading up into that high school programming. So and then I was thinking about if we are talking down the road about potentially like a major redo or rebuild of the PAC at the high school, then is that how long would that take? Is that, just worth thinking about how long is that gonna take? Is that gonna be like a 1-year project? Will there then be no theater at the high school for 1 year? What if we had planned for that in advance and had created a performing space at the middle school that was good enough and had enough capacity that the high school students could use it somewhat as well? And then thinking again, just all the talk we've had today about, what will the community support? I think one of the reasons that people in the community were really happy about the South End playfield you know, improvements was that it's something the community can use as well. It's something they can kind of see in their daily life. And I don't see, no, I haven't heard anything at least about the MICA project happening anytime like post-COVID, you know? And so I wonder about, you know, if we did the pack and we did it with an entrance on the backside of the high school, so people didn't have to walk through the commons, could that be a space where people in the community could use it as well? Like as a person with an elderly parent on this island, I was really excited about MICA because I was like, oh my gosh, my mom could go do a ceramics class, you know, my mom could take part in like dance for old people kind of thing, you know, for people with like Parkinson's, you know, yeah. And so like, is that something where, you know, we could just plan that from the beginning to have it be something that would involve the community as well and be accessible to people in the community as well. So that's kind of just like big picture, what I would, and there's so much happening at the middle school that's fantastic that does tie into programs like those you were talking about earlier, the CCR, you know, goals, like there's now like a really competitive robotics team at the middle school. We didn't have that, you know, 5 years ago. And that's great because those are kids that are coming into the high school robotics program, like much better prepared, you know, like kids are coming into the drone program and so forth, much better prepared in high school. So in terms of like, you know, STEM stuff and all this other stuff, all of which is important for kind of the whole kid and kids feeling like they belong, which is like, again, a priority for the district now. That's my like soapbox moment to just think about those things.
So to just summarize.
Yeah.
You're talking like just big picture continuity of programming when we're building the middle school, making sure that we're meeting the needs as they feed into the continuity.
Correct.
One of our huge benefits of this district is our small size and that it's all the same kids.
Right.
So to be able to do that continuity through.
Yes, yeah, and I think we've all seen some great work done in this district that involves multiple ages of kids. When like the high schoolers reached out to the middle school, the middle schoolers reached out to the elementary school kids, you know, even just like again, using the band program as a model. And so anything we can do that kind of enhances that and makes that easier and makes that more possible. And then to just think about sequencing in terms of like how, if we were gonna do a really big pack, you know, replacement project, what would happen to theater programs for that year. And so if there's a possibility of doing a theater program, like a theater as part of that middle school, which I don't know how much space there is. And
So I know the PAC is at, you know, the top of everyone's mind, because there are significant things that need to happen.
I would say it's at the top of my mind, just for the
No,
record.
top of everyone's mind is that it's a priority. It's a
Possible priority.
It's a need, no, not the priority, a priority, just like lots of other things. So when we say this though, I know there's people who have visions of it being like a standalone MICA, that's a community thing. This is a high school, so just be specific when we know there's lighting and sound improvements that we need to do for the benefit of our students and the facility. But are we talking, you know, so when we say PAC, just be more specific in terms of when you're saying what needs, wants, and pie in the sky, unless someone has a better word for that. I would say that everything you've kind of said right now is wants. They're important, but they're wants, they're not needs. When I talk needs, it's when I say needs, it's like things that are falling down. We've got Crest, the ADA access, those are needs. So just to be able to kind of separate out, and so just
100%, and I'm not talking about a separate building, I'm talking about
so,
something.
yeah, I mean, are you talking back or separate entrance? Are you talking about lights? Are you talking, you know, that kind of thing? So just be more specific.
Yeah, and it's been smart how the recent improvements have been done. I know that they specifically, like the whatever new sound and lighting equipment was put in with an eye towards being able to reuse it in some future design, so.
If I can just add on a couple things. One is, you're spot on with the CCR CTE. It is not meant to be a 9-12 thing. It is meant to be a 6-12. We have been limited in our offerings for our CTE, because A, space and the facilities that we have down there. And then B is, what is the priority of our students? In other words, when you're done with your 4 core classes, you only have 2 electives, and band and orchestra and choir is a strong one. And then when they get to 7th and 8th grade, world language becomes for some a priority. But that doesn't mean we couldn't think as a community about those before and after school clubs and what are some spaces that we have that can be multi-purpose. So I think that there's a piece there. An example of how we brought this to life at the middle school is when we chose to do the half that we did. We wanted to do common spaces, library, commons, PE, but we also said we have a thriving program in band and orchestra and choirs coming along. That's why that was prioritized in that first build. Now we have to think about what are the next priorities so that we can have that continuity there. So I think we've done that, and I hear you saying, keep doing that, keep thinking about not just the experience there, but the total experience.
I'm just gonna, because of what Maggie has already said, my concern is more a tiny picture, not giant pie in the sky picture. But what I'm hearing a lot from the community, concern to make sure that when consultations are done with staff, and schools, for, specifically what we want to have going to projects or specifically what we need, that the affected staff are consulted. So, for example, the pack that the band directors and the orchestra conductor and those people are really consulted with what they specifically need. So we don't get into the position of maybe a school administrator, at the high school, middle school level saying like, oh, I think we need this, but not really drilling down to the experts that we have in the building to make sure that that's meeting their specific needs. Because what I wouldn't want to do is to spend a lot of money on something and then have the people in charge of that program being like, that doesn't really help. Or, this didn't fit this, we really needed that and nobody asked us and we weren't able to tell anyone. So that's my concern, is just to make sure that we're talking to the right people and asking the right questions before we allocate large sums of money.
Do you want to talk about why selecting architects early for any project is important to that? I mean, this is usually the house.
Yeah, in that, little, schedule that we showed about selecting architects, we want to get that done in February, March, so that we really have 3 months with staff to do exactly that deep dive about what are the priorities, and then we absolutely get it right, and then we take the summer to be able to document that, cost estimate it, and bring it back for validation. It's been very much a community process to date, this long-range facilities plan, and if we're gonna take it forward, we really have to spend that time with the staff to define exactly what it is.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're spending the money where we need to spend it.
Absolutely.
And not, on what, like, people who maybe don't have the full picture or have such a big picture, they don't have the tiny picture.
Yeah.
Think, what we need to spend on.
And I think adding on to that, it's not only hearing what people really want, but setting the expectation of maybe when that can be delivered. Because if it's on a cap tech side, that may be a little bit longer, or if it's on the bond side, it may be a future bond and not the first one, because some of our needs are greater than our wants. And so we also will have to manage some expectations, not just of our staff, but our community about what we want to do. We were very aggressive in 2012 and went for the full meal deal with 3 elementary schools and a middle school. And I think there were a couple of reasons why that was not supported. And I think the first and foremost is the community didn't really see that as a complete need, and it was too expensive at that time. So how are we breaking it apart? I think you as a board and more recently, we've been thinking about that, but great point, Stuart.
I guess, 3 things that haven't been discussed. One, I would like to see, at a high level, recent projects in the area that have been constructed and what the costs of those are. I know that they're all submitted to the Capital Projects Advisory Review Board, sort of publicly available, just to get a sense of whether or not the estimates are in fact aligned to actuals. Returning to the example that I've given several times today, a recently completed elementary school in Renton seemed significantly less expensive than at least was in my mind of what's been presented as a cost for an elementary.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Is that, is your inquiry on that to to see that maybe we could put more into a bond than
Precisely.
what we've perhaps have here. Is that kind of what you're thinking on that?
Several, I mean, like, one is to make sure that we're not overpaying for projects. And two, I mean, the corollary is that if we are paying the appropriate amount, or perhaps, amount more in line with what others are paying in the region, could we do more with the same money?
Okay.
So it's that question, and I think it's a pretty easy, hopefully, question, just what are projects in the area that have been completed in the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, whatever the time frame is, to get a sense. And it just to sort of see like, hey, what sort of cool things have people been doing? A second is the financial, which is what is gonna be the median household property tax burden, and not just after the first bond, but I mean, for the foreseeable future. I mean, 20 years down the line, I don't want to be in a place where passing small bonds that seem small, but when you stack them, it actually becomes sort of like those installment plans where you end up paying a lot more. And then the third is what lens are we looking at for environmental sustainability? I know, again, coming back to this school in Renton, it was done with a mass timber system, sometimes called CLT, which both has a significantly less of a carbon footprint in terms of like sourcing the materials, as well as is thermally more efficient. I mean, I know one of the things in terms of thermal efficiency, when you do steel and concrete, there's this 10% surcharge. That the a lot of that, my understanding, is just on the energy envelope savings when you're using materials that might be inherently less efficient.
Yeah.
So making sure that we're doing stuff that isn't just that is both economically sensible and when looking at the broad environmental picture is also sensible.
And I, regardless of where we go, your voice as a board in helping to kind of set those, design, banks of the river, if you will. I mean, before we even head out into the community to have these, we will want to know parameters from you to a certain degree. If sustainability is really important, we don't want to go out to a group and not disclose that, because we don't want them to propose something that may not meet that interest. So we'll have to have a really good conversation in the end. You as a board will get to decide, and whether or not that's a 5-0, 4-1, 3-2, or whatever on your vote. I just know that it's best when you all agree and it's a 5-0. And I think that's why those conversations about what your interests are, because you represent the community. 3 of you have just been re-voted or voted on. You have a lot of experience with them, and you're hearing from community members. So all of those being part of the process. Right, will you be able to speak to that off the cuff today about recent bond projects and whatnot? Or is
what the
that
average costs are and the like, or?
Yeah, or just bonds that people are maybe even, do they give you a sense of which projects they're doing and costs? Or I don't know how,
I would
if we're on or not.
I would say, one thing to keep in mind when you look at those if you look at a $66 million middle school that was completed this year, is remember that the numbers we tried to share with the committee were escalated over time, right? And they were very much meant to be at the high range of that. And this stage is when we would go in and really design it and estimate it. And every one of those projects will have nuances to them, right? About whether they did CLT or whether they did ground source heat pumps, or whether they created a theater, or, whether they created a huge maker space, right? That helps drive those costs. But absolutely in this next phase, when we bring an architect on and do the design, looking at comps is going to be really important.
Although it seems to get a survey of the landscape, so to speak. Once you've engaged an architect, I assume that there's certain architects that, their domain is steel and concrete construction. Others might be more familiar with certain other, fabrication techniques. Is that, I just want it to be early enough and broad enough that there's a lay of the land before we've embarked down a particular pathway. Sure.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
and we can absolutely look at some comparables, and you take 66 million escalated at 5% a year, which is the number we used, which may actually be very high. You kind of quickly get back up to that number that we were using in the study, but that's not enough to go pass a bond on, right? Which is the whole purpose of this, year of exploration and design and really getting into the details.
So I want Ryan to have plenty of time, but I just wanna is there an interest of the board to because the data we know was skewed with the consolidation conversation, do we want to include in the discussion the possibility of talking about adding or giving the community voice in adding an elementary school to the next bond? And in terms of hearing proposals, do we want to talk about, the middle school and high school projects alone? And then do we want to also look at options of middle school, high school, and an elementary school without talking about which one or whatever, because they're all probably about, roughly the same cost. But is that an interest of the community and interest of the board in putting that out to the community, taking consolidation off the table? Now that we get those issues separate, is there the desire to look at that now, or do we want to take a smaller bite of the apple? Understanding that adds a huge amount of work to the planning process.
I would just add that I'm not sure, I feel pretty confident that we can follow that schedule and be ready to share numbers with you and a design to the level that you can go out for a bond. I think if an elementary school is in that mix, it's a whole other conversation. There's, which school is it? Every site is very specific. How are we dealing with, are we building on site or are we relocating kids someplace? And just the design of the building is very different, how we, update an ed spec and, we're gonna have a lot of conversation around that. And I'm not sure that we can do an elementary on that time schedule. So if an elementary were part of it, it may push that out.
I can't remember if it was Director Martinez or Tucker, but I think a strong course of action for us is to let the dust settle on the elementary question and go forward with the middle school and high school and then revisit the elementary later. I take Director Tucker's point that COVID was really hard on the elementary kids, and I don't think they need any disruption for a couple of years, like let the kids who are babies and COVID scooch through the system and then we can start.
And by pushing it out, you just mean the actual project and not the discussion of.
Right, not the, right, but just like,
It's not off the table.
it's not
on the table.
Yeah, but just for our purposes, I think for this next bond or whatever, just like the next couple of years, I think if we're making some improvements to the elementary schools where they're catching up to where they need to be, sort of like improvement wise, with our existing CapTech, maybe we don't need to think of too hard about ripping one up right now.
yeah, and I'm very happy to have the conversation, this year about planning for, one or more elementary schools down the line. But again, I think it was a really valid point that some of the parents brought up who were worried that kids would be affected by consolidation or by a remodel replacement of their school building. Let's keep that through the system or most of the way through the system. I was actually just talking yesterday to a professor of pediatric occupational therapy at University of Washington, and she was talking about the very different effect that COVID had on kids depending how old they were, whether they were toddlers when, in March of 2020, or just starting kindergarten, just about to start kindergarten, or they were already, in second or third grade. So I think we'll see, the kids that were most affected are actually kind of working their way through the system right now, getting through elementary school. So, especially if we're gonna be doing these safety improvements and kind of health-related improvements in the elementary schools, this upcoming year, then we can kind of squeak it out a little bit more. I think we can get a little more use out of our current school buildings, but I do think planning for remodel replacement will be great.
I echo that. I think that's great. It's good. I will only add one comment just because it might go into your conversation related to, the environmental costs and seeing how we can have you explore green bonds for any of these projects? And does those work for schools? Yes, no, and, could that be on the table?
Yeah,
Dan?
great idea.
I will forestall until we see sort of sequencing of bonds because well, I think it's intimate, the scope of the projects is intimately related to the duration of the bond, right? So I don't think you can discuss one without the other.
Okay, perfect.
Should I just jump straight into the numbers at the end of the presentation, or would you like me to try and fly through this really quick? You got it, okay. What would you, I have a lot of slides and it's a lot of data, and I don't want you to get lost in data, but I can go through that very quickly. Very quickly.
Do you have a hard stop at noon?
I do not, I can be here as long as you need.
Do we have a hard stop at noon?
Okay.
Anyone? No, we're good.
'Cause
I can extend off a little bit.
Educating is-
I think the education is important of
Yeah.
really how it all works, so.
Okay.
Do either of you have hard
Stop
stops?
12:30.
Okay.
12:30? Great,
Yeah.
we'll look at it.
I won't go that long.
I would like to make a quick introduction, obviously everyone knows Ryan Swanson, we just met him today, Senior Vice President of Piper Sandler. Personally, he and I have been partnering when I was over in Vashon Island for almost a decade now. And it's been my great pleasure to work with him over these past, almost 10 years. There are two parts of the conversation today. One is obviously kind of bonding 101, all those questions about how we move forward, if and when. And the second part is as we annually, year to year, we always have the conversation about can we do some refinancing, if you will, in common parlance. And we happen to, in that 2014, almost 50 million part of that bond, we can now. And we will make that attempt, market being what it is, and hopefully save our taxpayers about $1.5 million in that process.
And then
Sorry, Matt, but, or Ryan, what's Piper Sandler?
Piper Sandler, we are an investment bank.
Okay,
So, yep, we do everything financial across the country, actually outside the country as well. My specialty is I've been doing it for 26 years, about a week and a half. I do Washington School District capital finance.
Thanks.
So when a district needs to go out and pay for big projects, we are the interface between you, the borrower, the person taking out the loan, and the potential investors across the country that would loan that money out. And obviously, those investors are happy to do that because you can actually tax exempt bonds at a lower borrowing cost if you went down the street and borrowed from a local bank. And investors get that tax exemption, so it's a win-win for both. And then Matt's, I'll go into the detail a little bit later. And I'll just go into the detail. Let's start the presentation. All right. Back up one slide at a time. And I would rather be a conversation, so I will go quickly. If you would like to ask a question, absolutely, raise your hand or give me a smack any moment. We can start that going. All right, so school districts, there are 4 basic kinds of levies that pay for your day-to-day. And on the first slide here, I've outlined the 2, the most important one is your educational programs and operations levy, which accounts, depending on the district, of roughly 20% of your daily budget of just keeping the doors open and keeping things functioning. Those can be in a 1 to 4 collection year cycle, i.e. meaning that at least every 4 years, every school district in the state that runs an EPNO levy, and there's only about 8 that do not, they're really tiny, they have like 12 to 20 kids. They will go back out to voters and ask for this operating levy again for a certain period of time. Those levies require 50% approval rate, so you have 50% of people say yes, and then probably 1 more to get over that top. You are only allowed to ask for those twice in a 12-month period. So you've probably heard in recent years, there were some districts that went out their operating levies and unfortunately failed twice. And they are now in a position where they're going to ask again this year, but they've got a gap in their funding. So maybe we're successful, which is very difficult. A very uncommon levy, actually, I've got a slide much later on how often it happens, a handful of times over the last couple of decades, are transportation vehicle levies. And districts routinely use those when they have something go, when they have a bus break down unexpectedly, or a portion of their fleet, something happens to it, they need to do a quick turnaround. Transportation levies are a 1 or 2 year collection cycle, and just like EPNO, they're also 50% plus. In the middle of slide 2, we reference capital projects levies, and the reason I grouped slides 2 or the bonds and the capital levies before, think of those levies as how you're going to pay for construction projects, everything we've been discussing today. And capital projects levies are traditionally for your smaller projects, re-roofing, maybe a small extension to a school, maybe a new Theater, maybe, but that'd be asking a lot, depending on the school district. Bonds
Can
are
I,
much-
can I ask you a question? If it's a super easy answer and quick. How is it that like Lake Washington, Bellevue, Issaquah they're not even running bonds anymore? They're just-
Actually, Issaquah, we're working with them right now, potentially going out for a large issue. I can't give the details because the board is still considering it, but they will be asking again. Lake Washington is one of the few large districts that has tried to switch over to capital projects levies, and they were successful in the ask, because capital projects levies, like the first two I discussed, are also a 50% plus one. Seattle doesn't do bonds because their tax base is so large that they can raise $100 million in any given year for a dime or a quarter, let's say. Lake Washington is getting there. Lake Washington and Bellevue are close, and you guys are maybe a couple steps down, but ultimately the magnitude of the projects you're trying to undertake are too much for capital projects levy. Lake Washington is, like I said, they're close. So what they're going to do is they're going to tackle it in a slightly different way. They're going to use their non-voted debt capacity, which is much more restricted, but they can get some things done. And they're also going to do a little bit more pay as you go, which means that the project might take a little longer and cost a little bit more to do over a long term. Bonds really are the tool for taking on a big project. Think about it as if you were going to buy a home. If you could purchase your home and have to pay it off really quickly and have a small amount of interest, we all would, but that precipitates a much higher bill. Or if someone would let you move in and live in that house and pay them over a long period of time and just you essentially own it, but you don't, that's what a capital projects levy would allow you to do.
So the reason people are moving away from the bonds is because of the passage rate
Yes.
and only the passage rate.
That's
So if
the
we get
predominant
the passage rate down to 50%, which is democracy, then that issue sort of goes away.
It would, well, I
Or
think
helps.
it would help a lot. And well, over the last 30, 40 years, on an annual basis, 40% of bonds have been put forward that passed. On any given year, 4 out of 10 pass, and that's because there is a 60% supermajority required for a bond to pass. If over that same time period, it had been a simple majority, 50% plus one, 80% of bonds would pass. So we still have a 20% failure rate, but 80% of them would have gone through. Now, I think if that changes, will we see 80% pass going forward? I doubt it, because just like with a simple majority that went into effect for the other three levies in 2008, those have mitigated, so it's spiked up to much higher approval and then it's dropped back down. But absolutely, if we did get 50, or even as you probably saw, there was a bill introduced this week for 55, because somebody's trying to find middle ground. At 55, it would kind of split that difference, roughly, let's say 60%.
Sorry, can I just ask, you said that, I think like Washington was using their non-voted debt capacity.
Yes,
Does that mean they're just basically taking out a loan, like the way that like I might take out an auto loan? or something
and
like
a
that?
bond is also a loan. It's
Right,
essentially the same thing,
right.
but yeah, what they're doing is, even though the voters are voting for capital project levy,
Yeah.
the rules for the RTW and the WAC
Yeah.
are much different for capital projects. Because again, capital projects are only allowed to be collected over 1 to 6 or 2 to 6 year period.
Yes.
They're not meant for long-term projects.
Yes.
Whereas bonds, technically, they can go out 40 years.
Oh my gosh.
Please don't do that.
Yeah.
That was the death of the monorail. The monorail was going to use a 40-year term for its repayment. And when people found out how much the interest on that was going to be, they were like, we don't like the monorail so much. So that's what ultimately caused it to stop. Most bonds are 20 to 25 year in length. That's not just true in Washington, that's true nationally. Because when you think about it, if you pass a big bond and take out a big loan, you're eventually going to have more needs, as Dan was saying before, there's gonna be more down the road. So you try and structure it so that you would build something, get that accomplished, and then hopefully the debt pay off or at least be minimized 20 years out or 25 years out, so you can take on that next thing.
So with this non-voted debt, I'm just curious, like how are they collecting if it's not voted?
Exactly, and so it's the capital projects levy is approved, so they have a revenue stream, and essentially they're borrowing against that
The
revenue
market
stream.
is that, okay,
But
good,
the revenue stream is a maximum term length of 6 years.
right,
So if you were gonna try and do projects that were longer, where you have to pay it off that loan in 6 years, because that would go away.
okay,
And also with capital projects levies, the rule of thumb is you can't borrow against it and then build new. Because really the better tool for that would be a bond issue.
okay. Wow,
You would have to talk to your legal counsel as to whether or not something is new or not. The most creative thing I've seen is a school district needed a new track and field. It wasn't new because it was part of an overall campus plan. So they had a track and field over here, they're gonna build one over here, and it was a remodel. So that was how it was allowed. Some attorneys would allow it, some would not, but it all comes down to what are you exactly planning to do? And a capital projects levy will limit what you're allowed to tackle, and how you can tackle it.
Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of voters right now see the capital projects levy as a good alternative for bonds, because I think that's 50% plus one. And we're not committing something for 20 or 30 years, but you're very limited. And I'll have a slide later. You're not allowed to borrow nearly as much for capital projects levy in your capacity, because it's exactly that. It's only a 6-year term and it's a set amount of collection. So hit those slides really quick. Were there any other questions? The bonds, again, up to a 4-year term, most of the time 20 to 25, 60% supermajority. And there is another factor that you will hear about. This November, there will be a presidential election. There'll be a large turnout, obviously. For all of calendar year 2025, any district that runs a bond issue will have to have a 60%, but they will also have to have a minimum of 40% of the folks that turn out this November turn out for that election. It's called a validation requirement. So a lot of folks have been worried, like, oh my gosh, why would we go out in 2025? Because what if the voters don't show up and it doesn't validate? In the last 21 years, there have been 2 districts that successfully met the 60% threshold and did not validate. One was Renton, where they got 62% in February, but they didn't validate. That was the year of the really bad snowstorm. So there was a lot of difficulty getting people to turn out. They went again the following November, and not only did the percentage yes go up, but they validated an election. The time before that was Meade in 2001. So validation is something you should be aware of, but it should not be a determining factor of whether or not you offer a bond. If you're going to skip an entire year, because if we get into a cycle where no school district is running a bond ever after the year after a presidential election, or even after a midterm election, you're going to very much make it impossible to pass the bond. So I believe, I understand validation's out there, but it's not.
Yeah, Mercer Island rates are very.
Yeah, your voter turnout is strong. Very strong. So those are the 4 basic kinds of levies. Slide 3, I've got a few of the election dates coming up. So if you are targeting April of 2025 for a bond, if you so choose, you're going to have your resolution turned into the county by February 21st. So you've got a little over a year here to get a lot of work done, and you've done a lot of work already. I put on the last 2 dates, April 4th is approximately when the ballots will go out. So that's a good day to know for when you're doing your campaign, or you are not, your citizens committee is doing campaigning and doing communications. And it always takes a while for things to validate. So like Brandy said, early May, that would validate. If it was successful and you came to me and you said, well, we need to get things started this summer, it takes about 8 to 12 weeks to go through the process of when you say go, to be able to have the money in the bank. It's probably closer to 12 weeks now. Slide 4, just so you have it. Here is going back to 1992, a history of bond elections for K-12 school districts throughout the state. There are 4 election dates: February, April, August, and November. There used to be 6 a long time ago, but we've had 4 for a long time now. Most districts go out in February for bonds, and that's because most districts go out for their other levies in February as well. When you think about your budget cycle, you need to know when you're going to have money, or you're going to eventually the following year, like April. So if you don't go out until after that, it can be very hard on people like Matt to be able to say, hey, we will have funds to do things we want to accomplish. But April and November are also very common times now for bonds. It's becoming more popular, and the passage percentage is just a little bit lower. On the bottom graph, it shows you how many attempts there were in any given calendar year and what the percentage of those that passed were. As you can see, the numbers that have drawn my attention, so you go back to the early 90s, you'll notice in the old days, we would have 100 asks in a year, districts around the state. Over the last 5 years, that has fallen off precipitously. Many, obviously because of the McCleary decision and COVID, districts have been hesitant to go out and ask voters to open their wallets and help them take care of projects. That might be one reason why the most recent issues have not had success, is because there haven't been as many asks. People are getting trained not to ask for loans. Slide 5 is where I think that trend is going to change, because there's been so much pent-up demand. People have deferred capital projects needs. They were doing it before McCleary. Missouri came along, they did it more, because people were confused, what's going on with taxes, and then COVID hit, so there was even more deferral. We are seeing 21 districts venture forth this February alone for bond issues, and this is all of them that I'm aware of. We still have to verify with some of the counties, there might be one or two out there, but this should be everyone that's going out. And you can see, it ranges from Little Peterson down to 525,000, all the way to Tacoma, going out for 615 million. All depends on how much they're asking for and what they want to accomplish. On the far right side, I have an estimate of what I believe the number of capital projects will be, MEP and others and transportation. I think those numbers are going to go up a little bit, because we heard from Whitman County yesterday, and they have a number of small issues, but that's a ballpark of what's going to be put forward. So across the state, there's going to be over $7 billion of ask in local school levies across the state. You guys live in King County though, so we created a slide, thanks to Matt's suggestion, of the elections that have gone on since 1992 for King County specifically. And as you can see, it generally mirrors what happens at the state level, although King County has a little bit higher success rate than other counties around the state, given the nature of our voters. And since you guys like to have detailed information, we created all of the King County school districts going back to 2007 for all their bond asks. And as you notice there on the far right of slide 7, rent is the only one that failed due to validation. But this gives you when they went, which district, the amount they asked for, the voter percentage, as well as where the passed or failed. I basically tried to get as many as I could on 2 slides. Remember, 2008 is when simple majority went into effect for the other 3 levy types. So I kind of liked the symmetry there, that this is more recent history and what has been, what's happened. If you would like, I believe I put the term for capital project stuff. I made a supplemental slide back. Yeah, didn't want to get off the words right. Slide 9, we've kind of covered this already. It's a Cliff Notes version of the major milestones if you're going to go up there on. So if you're going to be tackling a bond election in April of 24, this is the rough time frame of when you should be doing certain things, and you are well on track for that pace. Most districts only give themselves a year in total. You've been talking about it for 2 or 3. So you're doing really good work on the funding front. Slide 10, it's this again, it's the Washington School District bonds, but it's broken out by election. And the reason I highlighted certain bars gold is because those are the years after a presidential election. So as you can see, voter turnout, validation could be a concern, but again, it doesn't make me worry about it. You go out because you ask for a bond when you have the need. You don't try and time a bond for when you think it's going to be, most convenient for her. Same thing on slide 11. It's the April election specifically. Again, the gold bars represent after presidential years. Slide 12, there was one little district back in 2009, which again was after presidential election that wanted to go for bond issue. I do not recommend going out in August because most of your support base and most of your citizens are disconnected. Obviously, they're doing other things in the summertime, hopefully. One did, and in a year after presidential election year, they passed. Which, so the story I get from that is that if you communicate clearly and have a clear message and the citizens understand the need, they will support it. I think that's true of anybody. If people don't understand why you're asking for the funds, their natural tendency is like, I'm gonna say no. But if they understand where you want to accomplish and why you want to accomplish it, that is what will get you over the hump against other funds.
And just to add to that, I think historically, at least on Mercer Island, is, the more information we have with specific plan, the better. And it also keeps when there isn't a organized no group, there's a much higher likelihood of it passing.
Yeah, and we conducted a voter survey this year. We polled citizens across the state. And the one resounding thing that came through is that people they want more information than they even haven't had received in the past. A lot of districts don't go into the level of detail that Mercer Island does. They say, we're going to do a middle school. And here's a conceptual drawing of what it might look like, which generally has worked, but I think voters are demanding more information these days. So the work that you're going to put in with Randy Self and others is well founded. Slide 14, here are all the books that went out in calendar year 2022, which was, obviously February of this year is almost equivalent to that. We had 4 districts pass. 3 of those 4 were in King County, and the other one was Bellingham and Rockland. Again, all 4 of these jurisdictions had very clear, well-defined, well-described campaigns as for what they were going to accomplish. I hate throwing under the bus, but even some of these school districts, they were going out for a vote for a bond issue, and there was the need, the community that was there, and in some instances, they were actually gonna have a potential reduction in their total tax rate from what they had been previously paying, and they still failed. And they failed under 50%. I won't say which one, but again, I go back to it. People believe what you're going to accomplish is going to solve a problem. And they agree with it. That is what's going to pass. It doesn't matter how good a deal it could be. They want a problem solved. Slide 15 is everybody that happened in 2023. 20 of them only 2 passed last year, one being Pasco, the other South Whitby. South Whitby had a couple of their attempts. They've been trying for a while. It's a smaller community, a little bit easier communication. Pasco, much bigger, one of the fastest growing districts in the state. The need was very evident for what needed to accomplish. I'm not doing this to scare you. I'm just trying to show you how difficult it is and how important it is that whatever decision you decide to move forward on, as you were stating earlier, the more the board can be resolved or whatever that process, whatever you're going to pursue, the more together you are, the more likely it is that the citizens will understand what you're trying to communicate and believe in it. Whenever I've had boards be divided, it essentially divides the community as well. They're getting essentially 2 messages. So whatever you ultimately do decide doing, the more you can work together and come to one focused idea, the better off you will probably be. I pulled one slide, slide 16 in my presentation.
You give this to the legislature when they're making their decision about pass rates, right? This is shocking.
We give a lot of information to the legislature. We're not the only ones. It's information overload for them. And hence, the 2 out of 20 is probably why that bill was introduced for the 55%. I don't know if you've seen any of the discussion of it. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and some of these districts haven't passed a bond.
That doesn't even, the
years.
55 doesn't even help that much,
Yeah.
but I mean, it helps.
Yeah.
But
I'm hopeful that post-COVID, you all lived through it. There was a lot of animosity to school boards specifically because you were the first layer of elected official that a citizen can actually walk up to and give you their opinion. I don't think you guys had that, but I've been at board meetings where board members were getting followed to their cars, to their homes, and abused verbally, incessantly. That played into a lot of negativity around elections and school districts asking for funds. I feel like a lot of that has passed. I have not attended a board meeting like that in some time. I think that will help going forward. And it's also, the more people are asking for funds, the more that the citizens around the state will understand what the needs are. When you only have a couple districts asking and nobody else is asking, it makes the messaging that much harder. Why are you different than the other deal? So if as the schools community move forward and address these needs, I think it's going to help lift all those for good time. Slide 16, the one slide I pulled from our voter survey is just, it was a question we asked about where people feel they get their information from their districts. Usually your parents and your teachers and the folks that are in your schools on a regular basis are your biggest supporters. And they tend to like to get emails or direct messages from school districts. Unfortunately, those aren't your only voters. You have a lot of voters that are never in your schools, obviously older folks. They are still relying on printed communications, the newspapers, believe it or not, chat groups, community boards, neighbors across a fence. So a lot of districts over the last 10 years have switched to more of an online presence. It's still sending things home with kids, but an online presence, and that was great because that boomed. But the take home from this slide is that as you communicate, you're going to want to hit as many different communication avenues as you can. And again, have a clear, distinct, if not script message from every board member, the superintendent, the janitors, the bus drivers. You want to have one message as to what's going to be accomplished, short and sweet, but across all communication avenues. All right, specific to Mercer Island, page 17. So you have it at your fingertips. Here are the various levies that have been reflected on a calendar or annual year basis by the district, what those tax rates were, and what the total rate was on the far right column. You can see 2015, 272 was the highest rate going back in time. That was, of course, right after that last bond, both portions of that last bond hit the tax rolls, as well as that was going into the end of, the Great Recession, so we had some decline in assessed value. Since then, assessed values have grown, while the district has asked for more money, the reason the tax rate has declined so much is because of that incredible assessed value growth that has happened over the last 5-8 years. So projecting, based on the levy amounts that were submitted to the county on preliminary numbers from the county, they still haven't been able to get us final yet. Like Matt said, late February, maybe mid-February, I'm thinking your tax rate will be about $1.43 for all your local levies here at Mercer Island School District.
Sorry, just going back, when, the news and information sources about your local district, that was specific to Mercer Island?
Nope, that's a statewide.
Statewide, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Good question. 18, folks are always curious about where they compare to their neighbors, so I pulled all King County and Pierce County school districts, what their assessed valuation is, which is essentially this the combination of all taxable properties within a jurisdiction, what their AV is, which kind of levy they collected, what the tax rates were, and what the total was. And then I ranked those by total tax rate. So you can see, you guys are fighting with Skycomish for the lowest tax rate in King and Pierce counties.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is informative, but I just sort of, did my own like median household burden, right? And that, looks at the assessed value and then multiplies it by the millage rate, which is also a pretty easy calculation. And I think, we're still low, right? Like, I mean, we're under Bellevue, we're under Issaquah. But when you then multiply it by the assessed value, it looks a much different picture than millage rate.
And that is a great segue into the next slide, because you're right, it's not fair comparing you to Skycomish. The 20 school districts around the state that have the most similarly sized tax base as yourselves is what I listed on the slide. So think of it, it's never a one-to-one, like you said, it's not apple to apples, but it's a tax base that's an equivalent overall structure. You're still near the bottom in overall burden from a tax rate perspective. That of course would change if you add more to that equation. But that's a great point. You're right. The home values on Mercer Island, $1.29, are gonna leave a whole lot more than you would for the home values in Skycomish, 69 cents.
You have a chart that says with our median income, the impact, like yearly or monthly impact in dollars.
I was at one point, but I don't think I put that in this
Thank you,
one.
median.
Yeah.
We actually included that in the slide deck, that Fred's deck has a slide that says
Okay.
what the.
Right. Because to me, that's much more impactful than a rate, because it's, how does it impact me?
Yep.
And my monthly bottom line.
Really quick, I did a quick Google search for the average or median home price on Mercer Island off of like Redfin and some of the real estate agencies. And I think it was around $2 million for a rough number.
2.13 by the King County. I mean, so like, it seems to me the most equivalent is one very small area, but Beaux-Arts is its own jurisdiction for taxes. Because home prices are actually a little bit more, they're 2.3 million. That the median tax burden for that community, because of Bellevue School District and the millage rate that applies, is almost twice ours. It's $3,500 a year. I think, in my view, like a particularly similar one would be looking at Bellevue or Sammamish, where you have home prices of right around 1.6 million. And for Bellevue, it's currently just under $2,300 a month. And for Sammamish, it's right around 2,500. Not a month, a year.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think using a round number of 2 million is, and then everyone can extrapolate their own, right? But, using the median of 2 million and then, yeah.
Saying how much that, so $2,000 times $1.29 is 2,000 and
But
2,500.
make it easy for us, right? Like,
Yeah, and we have that information, I can go back very easily, do like, and
I mean, I think in presentations, to me, that's much more impactful than this number, just because
That's
it's, people want to know how is it gonna affect my bottom line.
It's nice for comparison though. It's nice to have both.
No, it is nice, but you can do the comparison with
Yes.
that dollar and that dollar amount rather than this one.
Yeah, correct.
okay, I can absolutely.
Oh, yeah,
that.
have the comparison for sure.
Yeah.
That would be interesting, so are you suggesting on this slide then also having a median home value and multiplying that median home value by the total tax rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Make it easy, shove it down our throats. What is my, no, I mean, seriously, this is too hard.
You'll notice there,
For us non-members people, yeah.
the blue highlight is just in the last two, is just highlighting in 18 kind of comp districts around us. And then of this list, who are most similar to us, in terms of just, more similar, that's all that is, if you're wondering about that.
Thank you, Brad. All right, back to that debt capacity thing I mentioned earlier. So utilizing the preliminary value, most recent value I got from King County, your tax base is about $20 billion for 2024. Your total borrowing capacity is based off whatever that value is. So you take that value, multiply it by 5%, and that is the absolute limit for the amount of money that any your district can borrow. So right around $1 billion for round number. You do have. I don't recommend any of my clients going to their debt limit. I really don't recommend. But you have about $1 billion in capacity and you have 53 million outstanding, as we talked about, the 14 to 15 bonds are still outstanding. So you have the legal wherewithal to ask for that much. So any numbers we've been talking about to this point, whether with Brandy or you or the committee, you are well within your legal right for what you've been asking for.
And just so the 2014, 2015 bonds will be paid off, if you will, in 2028, 2029.
Fiscal years. Yes, yeah, calendar year 29, calendar year, but correct. Schools think of everything in fiscal year, we think of everything in calendar years, because that's how the taxes cut it.
And those actually escalate just slightly towards the end, right, in terms of how those payments are scheduled?
Yeah, usually what we do when we sell bonds is we do have a slight increase each year for what is collected, because as communities grow from a tax base size, that equates closer to a level or tax rate. But it's usually for long-term planning, the last thing I ever want to do is assume immense assessed value growth, because what that would equate to is if you assume 10% growth every year in assessed value, and that gets you a really nice below projected tax rate, what you're actually doing is you're raising the tax bill by 10% every year. And no community likes that, no matter what their work or where the resources are. So usually for long-term planning, we will use something that's lower, 2 to 4% for a 20-year plan. Because again, you don't want to overly burden, and there will be more needs in 20 years or in that 20 years. So you don't want to overburden those. The non-voting debt capacity is much more strict, obviously, because you're not getting that approval from the citizens of the projects you're undertaking for that specific purpose. So you take the same value and you multiply it by 3/8 of 1%. So the district wanted to go the capital projects levy route, and they were going to just do all remodels. You would only be able to borrow up to $75 million. So that's the main difference between capital projects levies for like Lake Washington and others, is that you have to, if you're going to actually borrow against it, you're much more restricted in how much you can ask for to pay for things up front. So that's why it's usually more a pay as you go. You have to wait for those taxes to come in. As we all know, taxes are paid usually twice a year, first half in April, second half in October. If you're gonna build a brand new school for whatever amount of money, you don't really wanna wait. Well, heck, if you have to wait 6 years for all the taxes to come in to then be able to begin construction, that doesn't usually work well with building a facility. What Lake Washington is most likely gonna be doing is taking on smaller projects, paying as they go, and if they do have to borrow for some of the bigger ones, it'll still be limited to whatever their experience. Slide 21, just so you have it again, it's your history of the bonds that are currently outstanding. There were bonds sold in 14 and 15, both from that build authorization in 14, we split it into 2 pieces, and if you did go forward with another bond, what we routinely do is we find out what your capital needs are, when you're actually gonna need to expend the funds on bills and borrow at that time. So we can make sure the money is in your bank account so you can satisfy the needs, but not take out a loan that's bigger than it's needed, because as soon as you take out that loan, it starts combining interest. So that's why the 14 authorization was sold into sales. You needed about 45 million to get things started, and then the rest of it was sold a year later to finish up the projects over. Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was about a 4.5 year period from the beginning to end of when all those were done. But that's what I
I'm a
remember.
little bit short, it's about 3.
Oh, was
Yeah.
it 3? Okay, you're faster than I remember. As Matt mentioned at the start of all this, there is an opportunity to have savings on those 2014 bonds. Right now, interest rates have declined precipitously since last October, thanks to the Fed's actions or non-actions, depending how you want to look at it. The bonds, whenever you sell bonds, they're usually a 20-year length. And when you're selling to an investor, they want some assurance that they're gonna have those funds invested for a certain period of time. So the industry standard is to have what's called a 10-year call period, which means the first 10 years of bonds, the district will not retain the right to refinance them or take them away from investors. But the last 10 years, investors understand that you might have an opportunity to do something different, so you can refinance. The bonds that were sold in 14 have a call date of June 1, 2024. Now, with current tax law and rates, it's a very opportune time to move forward on a potential refinancing of these bonds. That's why I brought it to math's attention. The math that I did a few days ago, and although rates have ticked up slightly since then, these numbers are very, very close to what would be achievable today. We would have a total savings of about 1.6 million over the remaining years. And this is just the 14 bonds, but it'd be 1.6 million between now and 2029. So roughly an equal savings annually. But because dollars, they aren't worth as much as they are in the future, we take a present value calculation of that. So really it's about $1.5 million in present value savings. So the taxpayers will hopefully be 1.6 million not collected for them in the coming years. And then from your financial perspective, you have about 1.5 savings. And that the factor that we use to judge whether or not refunding is worthwhile. You know how when you refinance a home mortgage, the general rule of thumb is you want to save at least 1% from what we were doing before. With bonds, you'd like to see hopefully at least 3%. Now, when you get to the call date, if you don't refinance those bonds until after the call date, every day that goes by, you're paying interest out the door you otherwise could have saved. So sometimes we'll set a lower threshold for a current refunding, which is what this is called. Just because if you miss that opportunity, it's a lost cause. So we will try and get as much savings as we can. I'm actually working on 7 refundings right now, ranging from yours at 3.7% on up to a few of them are over 10%, but it all depends on how they structure the debt, what their original borrowing cost was, and when their call was hit. So this is a solid refunding. I wish it were millions and millions and millions of dollars, but $1.5 million, Matt felt it was worth his time and effort to go forward and take that on, because it is. He already gave up 1 weekend to a day or less. I will try not to give up too many more weekends. Slide 23 is just cliff notes for you for next steps. Most of this is going to be for Matt, but what ultimately will happen is your bond counsel, Foster Garvey, will come out and give a presentation, and the board will have to enact a resolution delegating authority to the administration if they meet the parameters that you set to move forward with the refund. So we can't make the savings threshold that you want to see, or we can't get within parameters of industry standard, we won't do the refund. The one risk, myself, your bond counsel, most of the other entities that would get paid to do this process, we do not get paid unless the issue actually closes. The one entity that does charge a fee, whether or not you do it or not, is the rating agencies. They feel like their work is done. So if we're in a position where I don't feel like the refunding is meeting a threshold that the board would approve of or the admin would approve of after talking with you, we would potentially delay the bonds to not incur a rating fee. That's the one thing that it keeps me up at night on your issue.
And on next Thursday night, you'll have, we'll be here, but we'll have a presentation on all of this, of exactly what this is. So that's when, what's his name?
Lee Marquisio from Foster Garvey.
Yeah, we'll be here in person to present to us.
So think of Piper, we do all the numbers. Lee Marquisio and Foster Garvey does all the legal work. We work together to make sure that we get satisfied Washington law, IRS law, and federal law. So slide 24, just so you have it, is a bar graph of the assessed value and what it's done over the last 20 years or so. I'm going to draw your attention to the far right, just to the right of that red bar. You'll see there's a 20-year compound annual growth rate, aka the CAGR, a 10-year and a 5-year. And what those numbers represent is how much on an annual basis has the tax base increased over those time periods. And again, when you're planning for something short-term, you might be tempted to use a higher assessed value growth. But when you're doing something for bonds, I would not want to assume that, for the future 20 years, you're going to see 6% growth in your community every year. When I'm doing the levy rate planning, which the numbers we're about to get into, I'm going to use something more conservative, maybe roughly half of whatever that long-term growth is.
And even if there is growth, there's not much new building, so those
Yes.
will be burdened, that will be
Yeah.
the taxpayers that are the current ones that are burdened, or it's not additional.
Yeah,
ones.
you're not getting more people. Carry the freight.
And that shows
Or
your
the
knowledge
millage
of
rate.
the island, because the island is already fairly built out. It's not like your Casco where you've got big box stores going in every couple of years, or somewhere in Eastern Washington that's got server farms, 2 or 3 of them going in and doubling or tripling their tax base. New construction is incredibly helpful, but you don't have as much of it here. Good point, thank you. If you want the actual numbers, that's what slide 25 includes, and again, I keep pestering King County in a nice way to try and get the info. I will not.
We also have Mr. King County.
Slide 26, in case you're interested, what other King County districts have done this year, because if this were 1 year forward, which I didn't include, I did the math last year, most folks were going up anywhere from 15 to 30% in a change in the tax base. This year, most folks are going down anywhere from 7 to 15%. The important thing to remember, and I'm sure Dan will remind me of this, is that school districts, your levies are approved in an amount. So if assessed value goes up by 30%, that does not mean your taxes are going to, or your school taxes are going to go up by 30%. That's not how it works. If an amount is approved, that's what's collected. So the value grows exponentially. What will happen is the tax rate will go down, as evidenced by that earlier graph. If the AD goes down, the tax rate will go up. It's not like the district's going to lose a lot of money because the ADs went down. And that's not, it doesn't seem like that's something that most people understand. They assume that their tax bill goes up by a lot, my taxes are going down.
But you mentioned this as in levies or bonds too?
Bonds are a levy. I apologize you. Yeah, bonds are a levy. Exactly. Slide 27, again, just to give you the basics of what has been happening in my world, I care about municipal bond interest rates a lot. The Federal Open Market Committee, as you've probably seen in the news and in the newspapers, has been raising the overnight borrowing rate for a number of periods now, which has caused other interest rates were all based on that to go up as well. Well, last October, it seemed like they feel like they've made a soft landing. And they have signaled that they are not going to raise most likely anymore. In fact, they are thinking they're contemplating cuts or lowering the overnight rate going forward. And it was just that change in opinion or path that caused investors to think, oh, well, that means that the anticipated rates will go down. And it has. And over the last 3-4 months, borrowing rates in my world have gone down by 1% or 100 basis points, which is great. It's another reason why we have the opportunity to refund the bonds. If rates had not dropped, we wouldn't be able to take out a refunding loan and save money because it wouldn't have been good enough. The other thing I'll point your attention to is on that bottom right graph. Usually the green line is what you would expect. And when people take out a loan, usually the longer that loan is out for, the more you get charged for it, or the more you would earn. Like if you have a CD at a bank, usually if you have a 3-month CD, you're gonna earn less than if you have a 4-year CD. Right now, if you do a 3-month CD, you're going to get paid a lot more than you would for a 6-month or 1 or 2 year, because we are in what is called an inverted yield curve. It's very counterintuitive. You can actually make more in the short end than you can a few years out. And that is because many investors and many people in the financial industry feel that because of these rate hikes, it's going to push the country into a recession. So they are not optimistic about what would happen in the long term. We're hopeful that as the Fed begins to cut, that the yield curve will come back to a more normal structure, but the advantage is right now, the refunding opportunity is presented. All right, so the stuff that I think you're really going to care about, the math. Slide 28. We did 2 scenarios. Scenario Mercer Island 295, and 295 does represent the number of runs that I've done over the years for you guys. It's not anywhere near the record. If the districts were going to pursue a full or tackle all of the projects that we estimated might need to be tackled, and you're going to go out and ask for bonds from voters in 2025, 2027, 2029, and 2031, so 4 separate bond authorizations. And you're going to ask for these rough amounts to meet those needs. I estimated that the 2025 tax rate would be $1.38 because we're not there yet, right? We don't even know 24. And that if the bonds came on and we built them in a way where we're projecting out to a level tax rate, it would raise the tax rate to by 85 cents or to $2.23 per thousand. And again, I know that you guys want to have the median value and have that map, but the easiest way to communicate is usually what that tax rate differential might be, because everybody has a different value home. There are people out there that don't have a $2 million home. So they can at least have a litmus test of what is that change, or how much more is it going to be? They can multiply it by the value of their own home and have a rough idea of what that impact could be. Go ahead.
So essentially, every 1 point is about $2,000 median increase, right? In terms of the millage rate. I mean, looks to me, stripping out, I mean, just looking at bonds in isolation. I mean, the previous high watermark was, I think, 0.83 in 2016, just in terms of bond millage rates. I mean, this would be increasing it essentially, I mean, what are we, like 1.43 if we strip out everything else? My point is, it looks like more than 50% over like the millage rate. And then if I put in a 1.4 millage rate, that's the new hypothetical median of like $3,700 per household, which seems significantly more than neighboring districts. So, I mean, to me, like the most relevant, I think for a lot of people, is what's the median household burden? And then how does that compare? And then we can all make our own adjustments of, this is a more expensive community, we have more expensive houses, maybe we should also invest more in our schools. But millage is just sort of abstract, and when I see some of these millage increases, it's just higher than historically Mercer Island has ever imposed on taxpayers, and is higher than neighboring districts.
Well, it would be by far the biggest ask. It is over $500 million in total if you did all four of these, in that time frame.
With those cost projections.
Yes, yeah.
With those costs.
And anecdotally, I don't do the same work that Brandy does, but when I go out and see districts around the state, rule of thumb recently, an elementary school, I've been saying 75 million, but I know it's ranged from 60 to 110. For a middle school, I've been saying 125 million, but it's ranged from 90 to 160. And for a high school, I hate to say it, even 5 years ago, I was only saying about 125 million, but I'm now saying 170. I'm kind of doing 50 million up for each school, because we've seen a number of high schools around the state that are getting close to $200 million, which just blows my mind. But it all depends on what they're trying to accomplish, the size, what the ground is like, are they moving kids, do they have capacity? It's such a wide range. That's why I would defer to Brandy, and hopefully you can come up with that list that you're looking for. Because neighboring districts in Eastern Washington, one can do it for 100 million, other one can do it for 125 million. And it just depends on what they're trying to accomplish. So, or what they're dealing with from a land perspective.
I would just note also in your 295 run, that assumes a bond every other year. And what you've seen is actually a bond every 4 years, right? So
Well, actually more than 4, wouldn't it, bond? Yeah.
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 yeah,
So
it's
this is-
a 2025 and then a 2029 and then a 20, it's stretched out.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
So, and I'm sorry, I grasping a lot.
No, it's a lot of info.
Yes.
And, I do have to think, like I'm a very old grandma, it's just, it's things in life. So that means that every 2 years, if we go at scenario 1, you're increasing, like, you're doing that increase still, or it's kind of,
No, that's an excellent question.
okay.
We're gonna, maybe go forward one more slide. Here is a bar graph. It sort of shows tentatively how we could structure it. Dan mentioned this earlier about layering bonds on top of bonds. So all of this stuff is what's already existing. It's your EP&O levy, your capital tech levy, transportation levy, and your existing debt. And we've made assumptions about what the EP&O levy might be, because again, it can change, but hopefully you're gonna have an EP&O levy approved every year, so that's not gonna go away. So these blue bars right here represent the potential of those 4 authorizations, and each different color is how I structured the debt for each of those authorizations. So to be able to maintain, based on the assessed value growth staying somewhat consistent and lower, to maintain a $2.23 projected tax rate, we would sell the first bonds in a way where the tax rate comes up a little bit, and then the debt steps off. The next authorization would come in and bring it back up to that 223. The third, and the fourth. And they just layer on top of each other. What the district has done traditionally is you would pass one bond issue and not go out and again for a number of years. And actually, would you mind going forward? Go ahead and go one slide. I'm gonna do it in two pieces. Let's say you did that plan and the first bond authorization passed, but none of the others did. This is what would happen with the tax rate. It would go up to that 223 if we decided we want to sell it that way. And then it would drop down because we had made that capacity, but if it doesn't get approved, it wouldn't fill it. So you'd be right back down at the lower rate. If we may go one more slide, I did do a version, like, let's say you did what you traditionally did and only planned for this one authorization and didn't think about the future at all, or elementary schools. You could sell the bonds and structure them in a different way. The immediate impact wouldn't be as much. Instead of 223, it's only $1.81. The bonds will be repaid in a much shorter time frame. But if you do come back and want to do more and we lock things in like this, if you have more debt, you have to pay your debt back. It would be stacked on top of it. So the differential between doing the long-term planning, which most of the big districts do, like Spokane and Bellevue and others, they're trying to manage that overall tax rate because it allows for more to be done in the future.
Without as much of a.
Without
change for the-
without those wild fluctuations. But
Percent.
what we found over the last, well, I've only been doing this 26 years, but my firm's been doing this since the 70s. They found that the more that tax rate fluctuates, the more people get upset because they don't know what to expect. They don't know what's coming down the pipe.
Would it be possible maybe, I mean, at least for me, it's better to just have the bond levies because our EP&O, you get a little bit of noise because of pre-McCleary and post-McCleary and how that's been shifted onto, I mean, which is a line item on the King County Assessor's Office is the
Yeah.
McCleary, right? So one, I find it most helpful to strip out the EP&O and assume it's gonna be, constant going forward. Transportation is, fairly insignificant in the scheme of things. And then when it comes to cap tech, at least the way we've used it in comparison to the larger districts is pretty constant. Which means that the variable, when you're looking at changes, is just in the millage rate and the burden for the bonds. So like going forward, I find the most helpful for comparison purposes is to look at the millage rate for bonds and then what that means in terms of the median payment per household.
And we absolutely, historically, many years ago, early in my career when Dean Mack was here, knowing that the island doesn't have a lot of new construction, when we sold bonds to the district pre-2014, we just made them level debt service, which meant that it's just like a home mortgage. Principal payments were small in the beginning, interest was big, and as you paid off principal, it inversed. So that was how we captured, the structure for Mercer Island, and we only looked at the bond tax rate. But over time, more voices spoke out about, well, you're not talking about all the other levies, and it's not the overall.
Or at least a separate slide. I mean, we could have.
And I can't, I can structure the debt, whatever meets your needs. So if you only want to talk about bonds and structure it that way, I absolutely can. If you want to talk about all levies, I can. It just depends on, if I strip everything else out, it might look a little weird because this would no longer be level, right? Because I'm also bouncing off of what these things are doing. But I can absolutely know that.
I guess my point is when one includes pre-McCleary in terms of the tax rate, it gives I think it obfuscates more than it clarifies, because that's really just been moved in to a separate, like to non-school district taxes, but it is a separate line item from the King County assessors.
State schools 1 and 2, part 1 and 2,
Yeah, parts 1 and 2, exactly.
So Devin, I can go till 12:45 now if I need to, but I need a 2-minute final break. That's
Right now?
No.
Although, let me
I'm
ask,
not waiting till.
let me ask a question, because what I'm confused about is your proposal, or the numbers with the 25, the every 2 years, and then what Randy said is the potential bond schedule that we're talking about is every 4 years. So it stretches it out. How much, was there miscommunication there in terms of the two proposals? And can you tell us what would that be?
And I admit, I was running numbers with every 4-year cycle, and I thought we had switched to an every 2-year cycle, and maybe that's not accurate.
Well, we can go for the record in 295, we'll just keep going up on this. I think we can rerun those numbers however we want for Thursday night, and if you want to see them differently, no matter what it's gonna be, we can just rerun those.
Oh, go ahead,
I
Randy.
was gonna say, I think the other thing to remember is there's a full year to talk about this and understand it more, and maybe we can get over 300 runs with, Piper Sandler. But that, you know, what we would be asking next week has nothing really to do with what the bond rates are gonna be. That's gonna evolve and take shape as we define the projects and.
But I guess what I'm asking is, does this, how much does this change the 2 years versus the 4 years? Do we?
Can you create this model
Yeah,
the same for a 4-year?
Right.
Like, does this hold out, or is this
Absolutely. And
continued upon 2 years?
Absolutely, again, ultimately what it will do is that differential in the tax rate will be less, because you're spreading it out over a much greater period of time, but then is that what the board would like to see, is how many years will it take to get all those projects done?
that, I mean,
So,
right.
yeah, so over that time frame, and maybe that's when we made the switch, is to show what the worst case scenario was, if you really want to tackle everything and get it all done in maybe a 10-year time frame, Brandy, if we did it every 2 years.
That's where it started.
This is where the worst case would be from an impact. If we stretch it out, I can't take it to zero, because there's always gonna be things up there, but it would, ultimately, it's like any loan, you're stretching it out over time.
So so the numbers that you gave us are based on projected of getting everything done that we want to get done in 10 years or so versus this projected timeline is, I mean, because I look
10 years
at,
or something, yeah.
it's great, it's actually kind of like 2040 to get our last elementary done. It's just like, wow, that's really far out. But, okay, I just want to make sure and we can have those discussions at a later date, but
But we're still showing bond payment, just to be clear, I mean, how to 2048, so I mean, so in terms of the tax burden,
Oh,
like. With the numbers baked in, I mean, I guess, a separate conversation, I sort of look at it as what is the median household bond rate that's appropriate for our community, that's the steady state over time.
Right.
And then, once we know that number, it's okay, what's the projects?
right, but it's never going away because by the time we get to this, we're gonna be remodeling Northwood.
And you both,
And I mean, that's the whole point, is like, we need to stop this short term, let's do this, and then, oh, we're done. No.
and what you both are saying is exactly what every school district in the state goes through as to how they plan. Do we figure out what our needs are and then understand what the cost is, or do we say, this is the most we can afford, and what are we allowed to build within that? And that is absolutely the first question that every board asks. And it all will come down to your priorities of government. What do we think we need, and when do we want to accomplish it? I can build any scenario you want, I can have bonds only or whatever, but ultimately it comes down to how much do you want to accomplish with your projects, and what will that cost?
We could just put everyone online for a year and just do.
I mean, for me, it's about $2,500 a year in terms of current dollars for bonds. I mean, I'll just put my card down, I mean, that's my like gut sense, looking at median household burden for bonds, looking into area, which would be which by the way, would be, besides like a few enclaves in Bellevue, on the very high end. Right now, we're on the lower end. I think with comp districts, right? I'm not including those, like, I'm not including a number in King County that would show that we're higher on a median basis, but to me, that's the sort of the foundational in terms of, then once we have that in place, then it's a question of like, how do we want to sequence it? How do we want to get community buy-in? Do we want one bond, smaller bonds?
And just so I'm clear, is that $2,500 just for bonds?
Just for bonds.
Just for bonds.
For me, I mean, roughly, I mean, that's my sense.
Well, it's definitely gonna be.
Per year, right now we're at 1,600, which is low, I mean, so it's an increase.
Yep.
It's an increase, I mean, but I mean, that's my sort of 2 cents, but what I see
And that
hypothetically is looking at a much larger increase, which to me is a little bit off the spectrum in terms of how we compare with other districts, besides, certain small places like Hunts Point, Yarrow Point, Clyde Hill, like those small enclaves within Bellevue that have super high property values that are subject to Bellevue, school taxes, school district taxes.
I will put some thought in that. That will be interesting. Because essentially what I'm gonna be building is just a revenue stream. Based off of a roughly $2 million home, and I'm gonna have to assume that that home appreciates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then keep it at 2,500. Yeah, it's essentially whatever your tax base is right now. Yeah, okay, I will come up with something that's a revenue stream. How that would fit into a building bonds around that, I don't have a clear picture on how I'm gonna accomplish that yet, because bonds obviously are influenced by when you issue the debt and what the borrowing costs are at the time. So yeah, it'll be very high level.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. And that kind of, again, that was the presentation. Everything behind this is supplemental information that if you want to look at it, you may have more other levy types and other elections division.
I think that number is, to me, it's the most meaningful to go from the 1,600 median to the 25. And how does that impact? Then I afford $200 a month, well,
It'd be
it'd be less, but it total $200 a month versus, right,
And
going
that,
from 120 to 200.
and that's potentially, right, if we're doing long term, I mean, that's
Right,
going out for a long time.
Right.
But I think I think we need to be sort of clear, like sort of what the expectations in terms of median household burden is, and then make that argument to the community one way or another.
well, it's balancing the needs and the cost.
I just wanna mention that, when we present to the community and we have to make clear what we want as a school district, that we don't live in a vacuum, and we know that the island needs other buildings. And it will be a big ask really from others. So it's something that we have to consider.
What would be like a 2,500, that would still be, would be right around what some average, like with lower, so like their average, right now, they're $2,500 a year with an average property value of 1.6 million. So like we have higher, so the millage rate would be lower, but essentially, similar in terms of, the average effect, for households.
I'm learning a lot.
Quick bio break and then we'll come up and come back and wrap up.
Perfect. Wait, so did you get an email from something called, final forms?
Yes.
Yeah, I just got this. They're
come back together and summarize. So this was a ton of information today and a ton of things to think about. And I know the plan is to put it on the agenda for the next meeting. Where the board will decide if we're ready. But looking at the timeline, understanding the decision and the needs for it to be sooner rather than later in terms of how we're gonna direct the district to proceed in terms of the next steps for this plan. Is anyone anticipating having a ton of questions or needing much more discussion to be able to kind of get to that final discussion of whether or not the plan that's been proposed, we're not making decisions today, but the plan that's been proposed, do we need more time for discussion? We'll have time for discussion, but a ton of it before we can decide how we're gonna proceed.
Okay.
No. Okay.
It's
It
not,
doesn't, this is not set in stone, and if things come up, that's fine. I'm just, my question is, do we need to have either a big chunk of time for discussion, like extra, or a meeting between now and then to answer some of these questions, or one-on-ones if you've got individual concerns? So I guess if you've still got questions, like kind of individually, like wanting to gain better understanding, I would encourage you to set up meetings with Fred, and he'll bring in the right people in the, next couple of days. Or, we can set something up if there's huge concerns. So I guess just let Fred know.
just let me know.
If you have any additional needs beyond what we're gonna discuss in public as part of that decision.
And all we're looking for is, the thumbs up to start down the path of figuring out, doing all the work in the spring and then coming back. Again, it does not lock us into anything. Even all that work, if we came back and you wanted things, altered, it changes timelines and things, but nothing locks you in financially, just so you all know that.
And I would say, I need just time to digest, I might reach out if I need, I only had the question related to the green bond, and I forgot to follow Joanne. Just because I don't know if that's something that has to be put in that year in April 2025, or if that's something that comes along the way. That's option 2. So
We are gonna move the open enrollment update and timeline to next week's board meeting.
And the main thing, just teeing that up, typically it's waited till that late March and April. But given the other timelines that are always at play, collective bargaining agreements, RIF notices, budget planning for next year, I'd rather start a conversation now and just give you some of the top of the mind thinking so that if we want to talk about this sooner, we can accelerate that. And then it's one less variable that we need to consider later on that could impact how we're going to prepare for 24-25.
Can I ask a question in advance on that I don't need an answer from right now, but we had gotten an email from a resident of Mercer Island a month or so ago saying, hey, what about just opening enrollment at the high school? And I didn't know if that is even feasible, because I know that typically with open enrollment, we're responsible for educating the younger siblings of a child who joins the district. And so I would be curious to hear whether that is an option, because that's something that potentially could help, like kind of a more limited impact, but could still help us out and help some kids out. And
Great question. The long and short of that is we can set whatever parameter we want, so long as we're not discriminating. So we can say, we're only taking high schoolers and we're not even taking siblings. You have to be in high school. Or we could say, we're only taking it in 9th and 10th grade. So we can be really prescriptive on what we're doing. It's all based on
So we don't have to take siblings.
so we don't
We
feel.
The legal though is once you take them, they're in.
Right.
Right,
Yeah, they graduate.
right, those individual kids, but.
Whatever parameters you allow them in under is what you have to stick with.
Yeah.
For those families, absolutely.
That's just interesting, because I had not,
I thought it was-
I had not.
We have to take the siblings once they hit high school in that scenario then?
No, not.
Not if that's.
They would have to choice transfer in as well.
And we could even discriminate as long as it's not a prohibited category discrimination, in the same way that any other public education
Yes.
system can. I mean, like, colleges and universities, well, they do it on grades all the time. Historically.
Like
protocol-
grade level.
No, grade, like, if we want, I mean, it's not
Well, we're
done,
only taking
but I don't
grades if we
think,
have a 3-5.
I believe that would be legally permitted.
I haven't looked at that exactly. I have looked at,
Okay.
like, what are the parameters around,
Same as.
like a program, like, let's say our multilingual, language learners, we were just bursting. And we just had lots of students, and that was, even with we're exhausting TBIP, we're exhausting that, we could say, we can't take any more students who are multi-language learners because that program is so full.
Right.
So you can, if you demonstrate a hardship on the district,
Yeah,
you can confine
Unless
it
it's
to what.
a second class,
right,
like you can't do that with IEP.
Correct.
right.
Well, you can with special education if your program is, if you can demonstrate that it's full, MLL, those, it's just harder to do.
That's just interesting. Okay. And sorry, are we responsible for transportation of kids?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Interesting.
Only, yeah.
So we can move that forward, no big deal there. Appreciate everyone's time today. Turn it back to you.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
All in
favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 5.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.